Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
This didn't happen to me, but it happened to a close friend of mine, and she has told me that she wishes to stay anonymous. But I can tell you that she's in her 20s and she's very attractive. I will write this story as if it happened to me though, so you can hear it the way my friend told it. I had been working late at the office pretty much all week, which caused me to miss my regular bus ride home. Usually, if I wasn't working late, then I would get off the train and then get the bus. But as I mentioned, I was working late, so I had to get a taxi home all week. On the night that this experience took place, I got off the train and I saw that there was only one other person waiting in line for a taxi at our usual spot. I was relieved because at least I wasn't going to be in line for a long time. But just as I was about to stand in line, a man came running down the station steps, and then he ran ahead of me and then got in line. This both surprised and annoyed me, but I couldn't really do anything about it. I should have rushed to get in line myself, I guess. I tried to not let it bother me, since it would only be a short wait until I would be on my way home. I then lined up behind the man. After waiting for about 15 minutes, a taxi turned up and then picked up the first person waiting in line, who was a middle-aged woman. Then, the metal shutters to the train station stairs behind me slammed closed. It was later than I thought. I even wondered if the lights in the station will go out and all the staff would leave. I didn't want to be here alone. Well, I wasn't alone yet. The man who pushed in front of me was still waiting on his taxi. And moments later, a taxi pulled up and the man got in. Before he got in, I think we were waiting for another 20 minutes. This was much longer than usual. And I come to think of it, the first taxi that pulled up was black, and the second one was black. Was it just the one taxi driver working? So, I made sure to take a look at the driver's face. I then continued waiting there alone, and it was a little unnerving. I hoped that a taxi would turn up soon, because I didn't like being on my own in a dark area so late. And then finally, after about another 20 minutes or so, a black taxi pulled up, and it was the same driver that I saw earlier. I got in, and I was tired of standing there, and I'm glad to be able to sit down. I told the driver where I wanted to go, and I asked if he could drop me off a certain location. I asked, "Hi, can you take me to the construction yard?" The reason I asked for the construction yard was because it was really close to my apartment, and drivers and delivery people can never seem to find where I live. The construction yard was well known, so I always asked to get dropped off of there. And with that, we pulled away into the night. It was dark, summer had gone and autumn was here. The taxi driver then said, "Sounds like hard work. Are you going there to work the night shift?" I was a bit too tired to enter into a conversation with the driver, so I replied something simple like, "Yeah, I guess." I am always cautious when giving out personal information. He didn't need to know, so I kept it vague. We got closer to the construction yard, and I started to route around my bag to get the taxi fare. "Do you really work at one of those office buildings by the construction yard?" the driver asked me. What a nosy guy, I thought. "No, I don't," I replied to him a little sharply. I didn't know what he was trying to get at. Why did it matter where I worked to him? And as soon as I told him that I didn't actually work there and I wasn't going on the night shift, he changed. Instead of pulling over by the construction yard, he then sped up and kept going straight. "Hey, you can drop me off here. You're going past it," I said. I started to panic. I didn't know what to do and he didn't say a word. He just looked focused on the road ahead. "Excuse me, driver, here is fine. Let me out," I said. I could now hear the fear in my voice. It had a shaky quality to it. "You got in my taxi on Tuesday night, didn't you?" Yeah, I remember you," he said while glancing at me in his rearview mirror. He was showing no signs of stopping the taxi, and I was really scared now. I was scared of where this was all heading, or where we were heading. I had taken a taxi every night that week, but what did it matter? Why was this guy so invested? I sat there frozen in the back seats of the taxi. I can still remember the song that was playing on the radio and the smell of the leather seats. I couldn't understand what was happening. We drove for another couple of minutes down a dark highway. The lack of light made things 10 times worse. And up ahead, I saw the lights of a convenience store that I use regularly, and I can remember thinking vividly, will anyone find me when this taxi finally stops? I was scared of what the driver's intentions were and what he was capable of. I think at that point, I reached my limits, and silent tears began to roll down my cheeks. What's gonna happen next? I wondered. And then to my absolute shock, we pulled into the convenience store's parking lot, and as soon as we were stopped, the driver turned around and spoke to me in a calm voice. "Hey, I'm really sorry. If you want to make a complaint about me, you can. Here's my card and all my information. You can call my bosses and tell them my name. It's all on my card." He went on to explain that he was the driver who picked me up and dropped me off on Tuesday. And because of the location that I wanted to be dropped off, he remembered me. He said he wondered why someone would want to be dropped off at a construction yard at night. And then he said, "You know that guy who was waiting in line ahead of you at the train station? Well, that guy also wanted to be dropped off by the construction yard." And I remembered that guy, the one who pushed in front of me. The driver said that while he was taking him to the construction yard, he made a couple of calls. He was saying stuff like, "Oh, yeah, I'll be there soon." And, "I think it will be about another 20 minutes after I get there." And then I was thinking, well, so what? They have a night shift in the yard. I can sometimes hear work going on when I walk past there to get home. Why is my taxi driver not taking me where I want to go? I asked him if it could have been a coincidence and what he was trying to get at, and then he replied, "Well, the guy didn't seem to be an employee. There were no cars or trucks in the parking lot, and there were no lights on in the office or in the yard. But then, I saw a minivan parked just off to the side of the entrance. It had blacked out windows, and there were about 4 people in there. And when my headlights landed on the windshield, they all ducked down, as if they didn't want to be seen. So, for that reason, I found those people and my passenger very suspicious. So, I'm really sorry that I took things into my own hands. And if you want to report me for it to my bosses, then I'm fine with that. But I could never be fine with dropping you off there with those men in that van." I stared at the driver. It looked like he had tears in the corners of his eyes waiting to come out. I wondered if there was a reason why he understood the red flags. He was a young guy, and he was taking a big risk by doing what he did. It almost made sense, but I guess that it still could have been a coincidence. But then, I remembered something that made me shiver. While I was waiting in line, my mom called me, and she didn't like it when I worked so late, and she wanted to check in with me. I remember the words I said on the phone. I said, "Yeah, I'm about to get a taxi now." "Uh-huh. Yeah, I'll get it to the construction yard. That man was in front of me at that point in the line, so it began to make sense. Maybe the driver was right. It did seem like the guy in front of me was planning on something. I've thought about it for years, and I am so grateful to the taxi driver. Of course, I didn't report him, by the way. He might just have saved me that night from those men and that blacked out minivan. And I don't want to even think of what their intentions might have been. This happened when I was in high school. At that time, I was working hard on my studies and I was staying late after class as I was part of a lot of club activities. All these extracurriculum activities meant that I would end up heading home later than most kids my age. On the day that this took place, my club activities ended at around 8 p.m. So as soon as I was all done, I hopped on my bike and I rode for home. I was riding alone and I didn't have any friends who lived in the same direction that I was heading that night. It was late, but it wasn't super dark out. But I have to say that I lived in a rural area, so the cars on the roads and the streetlights were few and far between. Looking back on it now, I probably shouldn't have taken the route that I usually took to school on the way home when it was dark. It wasn't well lit, but back then I was familiar with the route and I took it to school every single morning, so I never questioned how it could appear dangerous after dark. This route involved heading down some twisting and turning alleys down by the canal. At some points, the width of the pathway got so narrow that you have to walk in a single file. It probably wasn't the best idea for me to be racing through there on my bike. I never really thought of any danger or trouble befalling me down there, and I didn't realize that it was unsafe for a teenage girl until that night. I was rushing home, not thinking about much in particular. I think I was probably wondering what was for dinner, and that's when I saw someone on the road up ahead. This guy was just stood directly in the middle of the pathway. He didn't seem to notice my bike approaching, and he made no effort to get out of the way. He was stood with his back to me, and before I got close, I knew that he was a big dude. I rang the bell on my bicycle, but he didn't seem to react. He just stood there as still as a statue. He gave me the creeps instantly. Who comes out down by the canal to stand in the dark? I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I needed to get past him. I decided that it would be worse if I slowed down altogether, so I tried my best to maneuver around the guy. I feel as if he was stood there on purpose to block the way, and I was scared to get off my bike in case anything happened. I rode as tight as I could to the edge of the pathway, scratching my arm and my bag on the branches of the bushes to the side of me, and as soon as I was next to him, I started pedaling like crazy. The most frightening thing that has ever happened to me came next. He lunged at me, and I swear, he only just missed out on grabbing my school bag. If I hadn't sped up when I was alongside him, then he would have grabbed me. It really scared me. I felt sweat pouring down my temples as I raced away from him. I looked back, and he was running, but he wasn't anywhere near fast enough to catch up to me. I carried on along my route for a little while longer, maybe like another 5 minutes. But I was shocked to see the silhouette of a person stood in the middle of the pathway again up ahead. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was the same guy. I remembered seeing his dirty-looking gray coat with my bike light illuminated it, and I felt so much unease and fear as I drew closer. He was somehow ahead of me now. It didn't make any sense. I knew that I didn't want to try and cycle past him again, so I slammed on my brakes and I did 180. I knew that there was an alleyway that led back to a busier looking street back that way. I managed to get there before the man followed me again. I don't know if he chased me that time or not because I didn't have the courage to look back behind me. I stopped my bike under a streetlight and I took out the old cell phone that my parents gave me for emergencies. I tried to call my mom, but there was no service. I got back on my bike and I just headed towards the area which had the most amount of light. And before long, I was able to find a convenience store. From there, I called Mom and I asked her to come and pick me up. I remember that my hands were trembling. I couldn't help but think that that man might turn up again at any second. I was trying to browse the magazines while waiting for my mom. I was still shaken up, but I couldn't focus on reading anything. I then saw a guy outside who looked at my bike and then decided not to come into the convenience store. I have no idea if that was related or not, but I definitely noticed it. I was so paranoid that I felt like I was being hunted. My mom arrived and then she took me home. I told her everything and I was banned from using that shortcut again. Also, if I didn't have a friend to head home and it was late, I was always to be picked up. That traumatic event has stayed with me, and to this day, I still don't like being out on the streets late at night, especially in the colder months when it's darker out. One thing that didn't make any sense to me at that time was how the man appeared ahead of me on the pathway. But I think I can explain it now though. One other night when I was on my way home, I waved goodbye to my friend, turned a corner, and then suddenly, a car sped up from behind me and overtook me while I was riding my bike on the road. It then slammed on its brakes as if to stop me from going forward. I just cycled around it the first time, thinking that it was just some older kids trying to spook me or something. But it happened again, so I knew that it wasn't a mistake. I tried to carry on cycling on the sidewalk, but then the car rode up onto the sidewalk to stop me. And I heard the driver's side door open and I just froze. If it wasn't for another car turning down the street, I'm not sure what would have happened, because as soon as I saw the other car approaching, I took the opportunity to pedal like crazy and make a few turns to try and lose the car. So, if the same person who was driving that night was the same person who stood in the middle of the pathway, I guess that after I pedaled away from him by the canal, he jumped in his car and then drove ahead to a point that he knew that I would likely pass through to wait for me again. Nothing ever happened after the second experience, but I hope that that man got arrested, and I hope no one else had to experience what I did, because I shudder to think of what it would have been like in both occasions without my bike. I don't think that I would have outran him. So then, what would have happened to me? Night 1. I'm 20 and male. I'm a pretty small guy and have a routine of walking my dog in the morning and at night. And what happened these past couple of nights does not seem normal. At 11:30 p.m., this white BMW is driving down the road, and then all of a sudden, he slows down close to me. I assume that it could be a delivery driver of some sort because other people live in our property. And after slowing down close to me, he then speeds up again, and this time, pulling into the house next to mine. I had the feeling that he was going to turn around and then come back, and he did. This time, rolling up real close behind me, and there aren't any sidewalks here. He stops for a second, and then speeds up again past me. I give him that fight or flight look, almost an angry look, and he parks sideways down the street. At this point, I just started running back to our property out of panic, and then he also drives off. Night 2. My girlfriend told me that she would prefer if I went out with another person for safety, and so tonight, we went out together instead. It was a normal walk, everything's going great, except for some paranoia. We turned around to go back home, and I hear this quack noise, like a call or a signal. I look at my girlfriend confused, and her face is pale. I then look at my dog, who is normally energetic and protective, and he has his head down and is frozen in place. I look, and I see a black figure moving towards us that came out of nowhere. I quickly rush my girlfriend and my dog home, and they sped up just as we do. As we get home, he rides past on an e-bike wearing all black, and the bike had no reflectors or night visibility. We are both terrified and unsure of what to do. Luckily, we live inside an RV on a big property with multiple people. So, that's about the only thing keeping me calm currently. Not too long ago, I was driving back home late one night. I had visited a friend of mine who moved out to the sticks. It was always a long drive, and I was feeling more tired than usual that night, so I decided to try out a shortcut that she mentioned. It was really dark out. The stars and the moon were hidden behind the thick clouds. I took the shortcut that my friend suggested, and I headed down a narrow country road. There were no streetlights, so it was hard to see my way. I always avoided this shortcut because I hate driving down dark country roads. But I wanted to get home quicker. It was late and I had work in the morning. I thought of what might happen if a car was coming in the opposite direction. We would definitely be stuck. But just as I was mentally taking note to call out my friend for her terrible shortcut suggestion, I noticed something up ahead. It was faint to begin with. It looked like a stick was glowing, and it swayed from left to right. I wondered what it was, and I strained my eyes to get a better look at it. I couldn't make out what it was, so I decided to turn up my lights to the max. In doing that, revealed the man that stood in the middle of the road, waving a lit-up traffic conducting stick thing. You know the ones, the little baton things that are intended to get the attention of the road users. He was also wearing a high-vis coat. I wondered if there was some kind of construction going on up ahead. I thought about it for a second, and I realized that it didn't make a lot of sense. It was a Sunday night, probably approaching 1 a.m., and there were no road signs or anything to indicate that there was supposed to be work ongoing on that road. As I drew closer to the traffic maintenance worker, well, that's what I presumed he was, he then guided me with his lit-up baton to pull over. I looked behind him, and I saw nothing but an open dark road. No barriers or temporary traffic lights, no workers or any form of lights behind him. It just didn't make any sense to me. That's the moment that I thought that something was definitely fishy about the situation. Also, this guy had one of those clear ponchos that people wear at the theme parks, you know? A raincoat in a sense. It wasn't even raining that night. I mean, what the hell? I wondered. I had to pull my car to stop as I was going to hit him with it. I was feeling really nervous, and I watched as he stared at me through my windshield. He then walked to the side of the car and looked in my windows. Something was wrong here. My brain was screaming that to me. He then finally stood a little off to the side and then indicated with his baton that I was clear and then to keep going. I didn't like that. I didn't want to go any further. I was really nervous of where he was telling me to go. For the record, I'm a female in my late 20s, and I wasn't sure if I could trust that man. Even though I am terrible at reversing, I decided to back up to the best of my ability, and then when there was enough space in the road, I would be able to do a 26-point turn or something just to get out of there. But as soon as I started backing up, the maintenance worker's expression changed. He looked surprised, and then he looked angry, and then desperate almost all at once. It was just unbelievable. He started power walking towards my car, and I let out a scream. He wasn't behaving like a maintenance guy anymore. He was scaring me. I knew that I needed to get away from him, so I gunned it as hard as I could in reverse to try and get away. I had to be careless and not care about bumping some of the trees, rocks, and bushes that lay at the side of the narrow road. I had to pray that a car wasn't coming up behind me too. And I watched in horror as he began to run. I had to keep checking behind me, as well as keeping an eye on him, and it was incredibly stressful. But I managed to create enough distance between us to allow me to turn the car around, and there was a wider portion of the road that I used to do this in. I managed to get away from that guy. I just keep thinking of how there wasn't any traffic lights or construction signs in the area, but just one lone maintenance worker that stood on the road alone in the dark. I don't think it was a ghost or anything paranormal. That was a very real person, and I think that that person had some bad intentions. I sometimes wonder what might have been waiting for me further down the road if I kept going. An ambush? Tire spikes? Or something worse? I find it very creepy how he looked over the car, saw that I was alone, and then waved me on, and when I didn't do it, he gave chase. And needless to say, I am never trying that shortcut again. This happened quite recently, so I am keeping the names anonymous. To give some context, at the time that this incident occurred, I was a 20-year-old female living in Nagano, Japan. I had passion for live streaming on the internet. I would sing, play the guitar, and I was enjoying it so much that I streamed daily. The effort that I put into my daily stream started to pay off, and I gradually gathered a small but dedicated fan base. I had regular viewers that started to join, and I recognized their usernames. We would chat between the songs, getting to know each other a little better, and it was great to meet people who shared my taste in music. One of the regulars was a man who I will call Mr. A. Mr. A always joined the stream and is one of the people that I spoke with a lot. We shared music recommendations quite regularly, and it felt like we had a real connection to each other, even though we had never met in person. One day, when he joined the stream, I thanked him, saying something like, "Hi, Mr. A. That band that you recommended the other day was so great. So thank you." He then wrote in the chat that the band that he recommended, he was able to see them in person, and he got a limited edition signed CD from them. I casually responded with something along the lines of, "Oh wow, that's great." And this is where the horror began for me. In addition to live streaming, I also had a few social media accounts across different platforms. One afternoon, I was scrolling through my feed and a private message from Mr. A popped up. I went to read it, and it read the following. "Hey, I sent you that limited edition CD that I mentioned on your stream." I immediately thought, "Sent where? I didn't give you my address." I had never shared my address during my streams or on social media, so I was completely baffled by Mr. A's message. When I asked him what he meant, his explanation was not just surprising, but downright creepy. Mr. A had tracked down my personal social media account using my public account ID. From there, he found my sister's account, And my sister had a lax attitude toward online privacy and had publicly shared our city and town. From her account, Mr. A discovered my full name, our city, my boyfriend's name at that time, and even my parents' social media accounts. I was so freaked out by this because I had made a very conscious effort to not put anything personal on the internet. And despite my efforts to stay hidden, Mr. A managed to piece together enough details to send the CD to me via postal service whole. I was so creeped out that I picked up the CD from the post office but immediately returned it, telling Mr. A a white lie. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, but it seems like the information you looked up about me was wrong, so I didn't get that CD. It should make its way back to you though." At this point, I was trying not to upset him. I mean, I did like chatting with him when he joined my live streams. He had just kind of ruined that relationship though. Since I returned that CD, I felt as if Mr. A's kindness turned to malice. Mr. A's friendly demeanor seemed to turn into something more sinister. His next message, seemingly advice, but potentially a subtle warning or a threat, it said, "Be careful leaving your personal information online. There are people out there who might misuse it." Then, the harassment began. He created numerous accounts with variations of my name and birth date, following my accounts with all these weird new user profiles. Let me explain. If my birthday was January 1st, the accounts would be named things like my name 0101. It is unnerving to see accounts with private information in their names that start to follow me. He also tweeted about places in my town, making me feel as if I was being watched. There was no direct threats, but the fear of being constantly monitored became overwhelming. I think he was being very careful. He knew if I said anything, he could just claim that tweeting about a shop in my town wasn't a crime. I bet he thought he was being really smart. But then the situation escalated. Mr. A tweeted from his account, "I got the Zenrin maps and phone directories. Just a little more to go." Zenrin is Japan's database of a residential map and is used for route planning. It's very accurate. And when he mentioned he was looking into that database and said he only needed a little bit more to go, it downright terrified me. That short tweet sent shivers down my spine. It was clear that Mr. A was trying to pinpoint my exact address. And up to that point, he only knew my city and town, which gave me some comfort. But the thought of him finding my house horrified me, not just for my safety, but also for my family. We couldn't just pack up and move. My parents weren't renting, they were paying to own the house. I felt so scared because if he knew all our names in our city, finding our exact address seemed inevitable. I started obsessively checking Mr. A's account every day, praying that he wouldn't figure out our address. But my hopes were dashed when Mr. A got dangerously close. He identified my grandparents' house from a photo of a nearby rice field that I had posted on my private account. The photo barely showed anything but fields, yet he managed to use Google Maps and the Zenrin directories to narrow down the area, looking for homes with our surname. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to contact the police, hoping that they would intervene without escalating the situation. Their suggestion to directly confront Mr. A with a warning made me reluctant. However, I followed their advice and I sent a cautious message to Mr. A, hoping that it would put him off doing whatever he was plotting. I remember shaking as I was typing, not sure if that was fear or maybe adrenaline, but I wrote, "I have gotten in touch with the police. You need to stop." He came back almost instantly with a chilling yet cowardly response. He said, I have no idea what you're talking about. After that, his numerous fake accounts began gradually disappearing one by one. The tweets about finding my address also stopped, and his dismissive response and the subsequent disappearance of his fake accounts brought temporary relief. But the damage was done. Since then, I haven't faced any direct harm from Mr. A. Years have passed, but the memories of that time linger. I still catch myself checking Mr. A's account, a habit born from those anxious days and the long nights. I'm not scared anymore, but I am very aware, if that makes any sense at all. The internet still is a source of joy, but social media is mainly a reminder of the darker side of human nature for me. I stopped live streaming and I deleted all my social media accounts. Erasing my accounts did come with some tears, but it was for the best. I had to do what I could to protect myself and my family. I learned a harsh lesson about privacy. It's a lesson that I will carry with me. I will always be cautious about what I share and who I trust. The scariest thing about my experience was not just the invasion of privacy, but the realization that behind the screens, humans can be the real monsters. I just hope that he wasn't doing this to others online like what he did to me, especially to those who weren't so careful with the information they share. Reflecting on the whole experience, it's alarming how someone can piece together your life from bits of information shared online. The fact that Mr. A could track down my family members, use public records, and even analyze photos to find my location was beyond my wildest nightmares. In the aftermath, I became almost paranoid about my online presence. I would spend hours going through old posts, deleting anything that could be even remotely revealing, and I changed my passwords frequently. I set all my profiles to private, and I stopped engaging with anyone that I didn't know personally. The internet felt less like a community and more like a potential threat. The support from my family and friends was crucial during this time. My sister felt particularly guilty. We forgave her, of course, but it was a wake-up call. Despite the fear and anxiety, I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. I focused on my studies, spent more time with loved ones, and I found other hobbies to fill the void left by my streaming. Even now and then, I would consider returning to live streaming, but the thought of another Mr. A lurking in the shadows always held me back. I continue to hope that Mr. A has moved on, and no one else falls victim to him. This happened a few days ago when I, a 19-year-old male, went to a festival in a city 2 hours away from my home. I booked a hotel room for 3 days, and this happened on the second day. I just woken up and I was slightly hungover, so I decided to go eat late lunch. This was at about 5 p.m. I got back at around 7 p.m., and as I was approaching the entrance to the hotel, a guy in a suit holding a computer bag followed me to the door. He looked professional, like he just got back from some sort of meeting, so I didn't think too much about it. I had an empty bottle of Coke in one hand, so I struggled to pull out my card to open the door. I found it weird that he just stood behind me when he could have just opened the door if he was staying in that hotel, but I really did not realize that until after. And once I got in the building, however, I noticed his weird behavior. He followed me to the reception because I needed to throw away the bottle, and that's when I realized that he was following me back to the elevators. When I got to the elevators, he stood a few feet beside me and watched me press the up button. I was getting more and more suspicious of this guy, and I got really anxious when he walked into the elevator with me. I gave my back to him, and I pressed my floor number, and I moved to the right to let him press his floor number, which he didn't. And that set off my alarms. I have social anxiety, and I couldn't bring myself to confront him. So I just stood in silence and I waited for the door to open. When the door opened, I walked out, and he followed close behind me. My room was at the end of the hall, and he followed me about halfway before a group of girls, clearly tipsy, came out of the room, and by God's graces, I somehow knew one of them. I made a big deal out of meeting her, and they invited me to go clubbing with them. I obliged, and I just talked with them as I watched the guy slowly reverse to the elevators and then get on one. When we finally went down, I noticed that he was not in the lobby, and I did not see him for the rest of my stay. I really don't know what that was about, but it shook me to my core. Like I said, I have really bad anxiety at times, and this made me feel like vomiting. What scared me even more is that I am physically a big guy. I hit the gym almost every day and I tower over most people. So, I never thought that something like this would happen to me. What freaks me out the most is that he just followed me so blatantly. I really don't know what to make of what happened, but if anyone has any idea as to what this guy was up to, please feel free to share. My name is Mary. I'm a female, and I'm 27 years old. And when I was promoted to a position at the accounting head office, it felt like a dream come true. The pay increase was a significant bonus, and I was excited about the new responsibilities that came with my role. I threw myself into my work. I was so eager to prove that I deserved the promotion. However, the one aspect that I didn't enjoy about my new job was my new team of coworkers. In particular, there was one coworker who seemed to have taken a special interest in me. His name was Tom, and he was fairly popular in the office. People often gossiped about him, and many thought that we would make a cute couple. They even had a word for it. Shipping, they called it. As if my life were some sort of a romantic drama that they all watched unfold. But for me, it felt more like a nightmare. I had no interest in Tom, and from the moment that I started in my new position, he seemed to spend a lot of time hovering around my cubicle. His constant presence was unnerving, and I did my best to keep the interactions brief and professional. I even asked him to leave me alone more than once, trying to make it clear that I wasn't interested in anything beyond a working relationship with him. But despite my efforts, Tom persisted. He often stopped by my desk with flimsy excuses, asking for a date at every opportunity. His presence was draining me, and I found myself dreading encounters with him more and more. And finally one day, I reached my breaking point. I told him plainly how I felt, making it clear that I wish he would leave me alone. And I hoped that that would be the end of it. The next day, I was busy completing a report when I realized that I needed a hard copy. I went to the printer, only to find out that there was no paper inside. Frustrated, I looked around for help and I saw a coworker nearby. He happened to be one of Tom's friends and mentioned that the paper was in the storeroom. And to my dismay, he called Tom over to show me where the supplies were kept. I felt trapped in a setup, but I just decided to get it over with as quickly as possible. Surprisingly, Tom seemed unusually helpful, leading me to the supply closet without his usual obnoxious attempts to ask me out. I hoped that this meant that he had taken my words to heart. And when we entered the closet, the door clicked shut behind us. I immediately felt uneasy and I tried the handle, only to hear laughter from the other side. My heart sank as I realized that I had been set up. I turned to face Tom, who wore a smug expression, and he told me that he wouldn't open the door until I agreed to have a date with him. My annoyance turned to anger, and I began to yell at him, telling him how wrong this was. I was not playing hard to get as he claimed. I genuinely did not like him, and his actions only proved why. But instead of backing down, Tom laughed, insisting that I drop the act. My anger turned to fear when he stepped forward, his hand clamping over my mouth to stop me talking. Panic surged through me as I realized my situation. I was locked in a room with someone who didn't respect boundaries. Tom, now angry, accused me of being a tease and pushed me against the wall. Tears began to well up in my eyes, and I felt trapped and helpless. But just when despair threatened to overwhelm me, the door swung open, and our supervisor stood there, his face a mask of anger and disbelief. Relief flooded through me as I broke free from Tom's grasp, and I rushed out of the supply closet to safety. My supervisor sternly instructed Tom to follow him to the office, where they had an intense discussion about what just had occurred. From what I had gathered, my screaming was heard outside, and someone alerted my supervisor. The incident was reported, and an investigation followed. Many coworkers who had once thought of Tom as charming were shocked by his behavior, and as a result of his actions, Tom was fired for sexual harassment and misconduct in the workplace. And the other people who helped the setup were written up. I was not satisfied with that, but oh well, better than nothing, I guess. Though the experience was terrifying, I was immensely grateful for the support from my supervisor and the swift action taken by the company. It was a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that it's crucial to stand firm in your boundaries. After this, I just focused on my work, though I have been a bit vigilant when I'm outside of the office. I'm kinda paranoid if Tom would show up again to get revenge on me or something. I do hope that he is not out there doing this to other women. So, creepy Tom who can't understand the word no, let's not meet again. It was summer break, and we, my family, didn't go on any trip, unlike every break. I was just 8 years old, and my younger sister was 3. We were playing along with other kids who lived in the same building as us, just on different floors. The building is not exactly an apartment building. It's more of a multi-storied house. The front gate is a bit further from there and the only entrance and exit of the building. So, since we were downstairs and playing, anybody who would enter or exit the building would be visible to us, and we would greet them because every tenant knows us and we know them, as well as their family members who might visit them. A new person visiting any tenant is rare but not impossible. Right adjacent to the big entrance gate is a small old-style window with a grill, but it has a small opening at the bottom. We were all playing, but then I got tired and I sat on one of the chairs placed at the porch-like place. I'm not sure what to call it, to be honest. From where the window thingy falls on my right side, and I can see it as well as the gate clearly. I was just looking out when I noticed a man staring at the gate, which looked similar to this. So basically, he was able to look at my sister and friends through it. It concerned me when I realized that he wasn't even trying to look away and just staring at them blankly. I turned around from where I was sitting to signal my friend to move to the other side away from his sight, which she didn't understand. Frustrated, I turned back and I was about to stand up when my gaze fell on the guy, and he was now staring at me. My body froze, and I could feel fear creeping up on me. I couldn't move. I don't know why I stared back at him. And suddenly, he started smiling. And when I say smiling, I mean full-on grinning from ear to ear. That scared the soul out of me, and I mustered some courage. I then got up and I ran towards my friends. I didn't tell them anything, and I just asked them to go upstairs with me, which thankfully they did without questioning. I didn't tell anything about this to my parents because I thought that they would stop me from going downstairs to play. The next day, we again came to play and I looked through the window just to make sure that he wasn't there. Fortunately, he wasn't. Or so I thought. 15 minutes in, I spot the guy again. He was again standing at the very spot and staring at us, at me. I tried to play it cool because my friends knew nothing about him, but I couldn't for long and then we went back again. From what I remember, this happened for 3 to 4 days, and now my friends started to complain about how I don't let them play and that they have to come back earlier than they are supposed to. On the 5th day, or 4th, I don't remember correctly, I made up my mind to not pay attention to him and just focus on playing. We were playing cricket that evening and I was batting. I hit the ball hard, causing it to go over the gate, which was a very normal thing. And as per rules made by us, the one responsible must fetch the ball. My heart started beating because I could see his grin getting wider and creepier. He went towards the ball on the road and then picked it up. He then held his hand out, gesturing for me to come and take it. I was shit scared at this point, but I had to go, so I did. And as soon as I reached to take the ball from his hand, he bent, coming close to my ear, and his words are still ringing clearly in my ears till this day. He said, "I'm a good man. Look at the window when you go inside. I'll leave something for you." That sent shivers down my spine, and I ran with the speed of light. After we were done playing, I saw him sliding a piece of paper from that little opening. He then looked at me, grinned, and then waved goodbye. I grabbed the paper and I opened it. He had written his phone number and asked me to call him sharp at 2 in the afternoon, that he knew my parents would be asleep by that time. It was also written that if I don't do it, my friends' lives would be in danger. As an 8-year-old, I didn't know any better, so I called him through my mother's phone. He picked up the call, and I didn't have the courage to say anything, so I was silent. He said, "You're a good girl. Just like me. You should come stay with me. Come outside. I'm waiting to pick you up." Because I live upstairs, I went to the balcony and he was actually standing near the gate, looking directly at me and waving and smiling. I couldn't contain it anymore, so I started crying and I disconnected the call. I ran inside and I bawled my eyes out in my room. Thankfully, my mother didn't wake up and I cried it all out. I didn't go out for the next few weeks and everybody kept asking me about it. I still didn't tell them though. That guy stopped coming too. I don't remember the time he stopped coming, but he did and I was relieved. Eventually, this experience started fading and I grew up. Fast forward to 10 years, I was 18 and my mother asked me to buy some snacks. I took my sister and then we went out. The shop that I had to go to was at the end of the road, several houses away, so not too far. I was standing in a queue when I felt uncomfortable because of the man standing behind me, because he kept pushing me. Annoyed, I looked at him, only to realize that it was the same man. My face went pale, and I could feel my heart throbbing in my throat. I tried not to panic and I calmed myself down by telling myself that he couldn't do anything in public, that there were tons of people there, and that gave me a sense of security. And as soon as my order came, I took out my wallet hastily to pay, but he beat me to it. The owner looked at him weirdly and then at me, because I was a regular there and he was seeing this man for the first time. I paid for it anyway, and the owner politely asked him to take his money back. I gave the bag to my sister and I asked her to go home to inform our mom about a man following us. And just in case that he attacks, I'll have a backing and she would be safe too. Our house is within the vision range of the shop, so I waited for her to get inside. And now, it's my turn to go home. As soon as I stepped out, the man followed me and said something like, "You're a beautiful lady now. Let's catch up." I kept walking and walking, but now they were far from the shop and he started speed walking and I had to walk faster. I could feel goosebumps all over my body. I started running and I could see him catching up to my speed when the owner of the shop called for him loudly, saying that some of his money was still at the counter and asking him to come back, which gave me enough time to get inside and lock the gate. I haven't seen him since that day and it's been 2 years. I'm 20 right now and I hope to never meet him anywhere in the future. I hope I never see him again. I don't know why it has instilled a paranoia in me, and I dread seeing him when I turn 28. Update. I told my mom everything after that because my dad lives in another city for work. I didn't tell him since it would make him hella worried and possibly affect his work. My distant uncle is a local cop and is quite close and trustworthy. We tried finding the creepy guy after that but couldn't. He literally vanished in thin air. We also asked the shop owner about him, but he said the guy came back, took his money, and then went away. Nobody else paid any attention to this guy, so we couldn't find anything. I go to college by public transport, so I have to walk around 1 kilometer to reach the stop. I take the other road, which is opposite to the road that leads to the shop. It does take longer comparatively, but I feel better at least. Not once have I seen that guy or felt anything creepy since then, which is a relief. But again, I'm kind of paranoid every time that I step out, though I do carry pepper spray and a sharp keychain with me all the time. About moving out, well, we can't afford that just yet. Possibly after I complete my degree, which still has 3 years left. So this happened less than 30 minutes ago, and I immediately thought of this sub, and I wanted to see what all of you thought. I'm a single female living alone on the 3rd floor of a row home in Philadelphia. The house has been modified into 3 separate apartment units, and I am on the top floor. I ran through a property management group, and a few days ago, they let me know that they would be sending someone out to repitch my window AC unit as it has been leaking and the water was getting in through the window downstairs. It's an old building, so it's more of their problem than mine. So I said, "Cool, no problem." They send out a guy who I assume they have contracted, but is not necessarily a part of the property management group. He comes in, makes some light small talk with me about my 2 cats, and then he gets to work. There was nothing out of the ordinary. He finishes in about 15 minutes, lets me know that he is done, and then he leaves my unit. About 2 minutes later, I hear him knock on my door again. I usher for him to come in, and he then proceeds to ask me if I have an extra key for the main door downstairs. I tell him that my neighbors, whom I am close friends with, have my only extra copy, and that I only have one in my possession. He then proceeds to ask about nearby Home Depots and the like, questioning as to the closest place where he can get a key copied. I ask him straight up if he is implying that I give him a key so that he can go make a copy, and then he said yes. That the property management asked him to ask me about it while he was there because they lost theirs. I politely told him that that was not going to happen, and I suggested that he take it up with them if that's the case. I then called my property management company to confirm this information with them, or to report the incident just in case. They never answer the phone, so I ended up leaving a voicemail, and I plan to follow up with an email as well. A small detail to add, I could have sworn that I heard him messing with one of the doors downstairs after he left my unit the second time. The key to the main building is obviously different than the keys to get into each of our individual units. So, having a key to the main door is only the first step. But being that both I and the unit below me are single females living alone, I didn't like this one bit. This is weird, right? Or am I bugging? Update. My property management group answered the second time that I called. My guess is that I was speaking to one of the leasing agents. She was pretty useless, sounded unbothered when I told her the story, and basically said that she would follow up with the contractor, but that she didn't really know anything about the service order because this was not a property that she personally managed. I planned to give the other tenants a heads up. In his defense, he did not give me any weird vibes prior to, and even in his request, he sounded innocuous enough. However, I don't know which door he was messing with, the downstairs or main, but he was messing with one. I thought about popping out to ask him what he was doing, but instead, I opted to call my neighbor friend and loudly explain to her the situation that had just occurred, making sure to emphasize that I thought that it was weird and that I was calling the property management company to fact check. The walls in this place are thin, so if I could hear him, he could definitely still hear me. I just saw another post on this sub, and it made me think about this weird dude that I met last year. So I decided that I want to do a little story time, because I totally forgot this happened to me a bit ago. I'm 20 now, and this happened in like October or November, so not even a year ago. I was homeless and I was couch hopping with friends or sleeping in my friends' cars, and I was drinking a lot and etc. One of my friends had met this dude in the same neighborhood who they did deals with. This neighborhood is known for old crackheads basically, so he was a bit younger, but looked like he definitely dabbled in some hard drugs. He had a sunken face and eyes with scabs on his face too. He was generous and welcoming though. He was obsessed with his cat, so I thought he was an innocent guy. Her BF, and I think one or two more people and I go and chill to drink at his house. He was a cool dude, a little weird, but he was alright, and I can get along with weird people. After a few hours roll by and everyone's ready to go home, my friend asked me where I needed to go for the night. I, of course, didn't have a plan. I never did. And that guy then offered to let me stay there after hearing my situation. I said yes very hesitantly, because for some reason, my skin kind of crawled when he offered. I don't know if it was intuition or what, and my friend then insisted and said that I should stay there if I have nowhere else. I then agreed, and then everyone left. He then yapped my ear off about spiritual things that didn't make sense. He then said that he was going to bed and offered for me to sleep in his room. I walked into his room to check it out, and he had a day bed that pulls out another bed at the bottom. So I was like, okay, I don't have to sleep with him, so this could work. Also, I forgot to mention, this is a trailer home that was not very well kept up with. The dishes were nasty and piling up, and they were attracting all sorts of bugs. The counters were covered in resin, tobacco, soda, just looked like it's never been cleaned before. The living room was clean, but that was it. He then started clearing some clothes off the upper part of the bed so he can lay down, and then stopped and was like, never mind, we can both just sleep on the bottom one. I then looked at him and said, You know what? I think I'll just sleep on the couch. It's okay. He then insisted that it was okay and that he wasn't gonna be weird. And he was acting like a kid begging me to buy him a toy. I insisted on sleeping on the couch, and then he got upset and then laid in his bed. But then, like 30 minutes later, he says from the other room something like, "You know what? This is weird. Maybe you should just stay here." He then proceeds to say that he needs to be alone, and I'm like, "Dude, at this point, it's 3 a.m. You're whining because I won't sleep in the bed with you. I don't know you." And then, he kept insisting on me sleeping in the room with him. I keep declining and I say that I'm going to sleep. He says fine, but that he's kicking me out in the morning, and that was totally okay with me. Morning comes around and he wakes up making pancakes. I then ask if he can drop me off at work since I'm working in the morning. He said yes and acted like nothing happened the night before, and then started yapping my ear off again about spiritual bullshit. It was time for me to go to work, so I finally leave this man's house and he drops me off at work. I work all day, and while I was still at work, during night, he somehow got my number from someone and then texted me. He said something like, "Hey, I got a case of beer and some weed if you want to come over." I told him that I had other plans, and then he texted me that I said that I told him that I would hang out with him later. Well, I never said that, so I just ignored him. He then texted me a couple more times with a question mark or a hello, and I ignored all of them. Fast forward, I think a week or two later, this man then comes into my job and asks someone for a job interview. I recognized him, and I was very scared because I did not want him working with me at all. He gets an interview from my manager somehow, and then he leaves. My coworker came up to me and was like, "Hey, have you seen that weird dude that just came in?" I mentioned that I somewhat knew him and that he is in fact very weird. He then brought up that maybe he was trying to stalk me. This was a joke at first and we laughed about it, but then he continued his work, but he did warn the managers about what I told him, just in case, and the manager emailed him immediately saying that he wasn't hired, and I was very relieved. But then, I shit you not even an hour later, this guy comes back to my job with a different outfit and then asks for an interview. This time he was looking around the place all sketchy, and I then ran into the bathroom because now I think this man is stalking me for real. Thankfully, the first person that saw him was my coworker who I was just talking to, and thank God, he seems to be a smart protective man because he then tells the creepy guy that he just came in an hour ago and already got an interview and didn't get hired, and that he needed to get the hell out. He did leave, but not without a bit of arguing. After I got out of the bathroom, my coworker gave me the rundown on what happened and said that the guy was definitely bad news and told me to never go near that guy again, and I haven't. I don't know what could have transpired from that, but it probably wasn't anything good. I was 11 years old when this happened, and I'm currently female and 24. I was visiting my dad and my stepmom over the summer in Saskatchewan, Canada. My dad worked long days during the week, so on her day off, he had planned for my stepmom to take my sister, who was 8 at that time, and also I, out for a date to get some bonding time in with us, as we didn't know her super well yet. She took us to get our nails done, to the mall, and on the way home, we stopped at the McDonald's. We planned on eating inside in the restaurant, but it was very busy, so my stepmom asked my sister and I to find a table and wait there while she went to the counter to order food. I noticed this rough, older looking woman, possibly in her 60s or 70s, and she was looking towards the direction of the table that my sister and I were seated at. All I could remember is thinking that she looked like a drugged out Susan Boyle. She looked possibly homeless and addicted, so I didn't give her much of a thought, letting her do her own thing, and I just tried to talk to my sister about random stuff. Once my stepmom came back to the table, this woman was seemingly already approaching us and then stopped beside us. She just said hello, so we all kind of said hi back and tried to ignore her. She asked if we were my stepmom's daughters, so she says, "They're my stepdaughters," trying to be simple to kind of shut her down. The lady says that we were beautiful girls and then begins to walk towards the door. She stops one last time and then asks how old we are. We had the impression she was on her way out, so my stepmom just says to her, 11 and 8. Her eyes lit up and she looked at me with a strange look. She said, "I've always wanted an 11-year-old. I'd buy her from you." That definitely crossed the line, so my stepmom finally tells her that we are trying to eat lunch and asks her what she's even saying in a somewhat aggressive tone. The lady got one last look at me, and then she finally left. She definitely didn't have the money to buy me, even if I was for sale anyways, so I wasn't worried. I think she was possibly on some drugs and not in the right mind. But knowing my shy ass at 11, I wouldn't have known how to get rid of this lady if she tried to talk to us without my stepmom there. We weren't super close then, but I respected her a lot after that day for being ready to protect us, even in a minor situation like that. When I was 14 or 15, I used to have absolutely no stranger danger awareness at all. I didn't mind being out at night on my own. I'd go down back streets on my own. Any basic safety techniques just didn't bother me because I thought that I would always be fine. One day, I was walking back from town and I thought that I would take my usual shortcut down the alleyways behind the high street. I'm quite happily walking when I round the corner into a guy who's loitering, and then we lock eyes straight away. I thought the polite thing to do was smile, and thankfully, he smiled back. I decided that he's no threat, and I just walk right by him. Then, I hear him say something about my smile. I shout thanks over my shoulder and then I carry on. I turn down another corner, and so does he. And now he's saying that he likes my trainers, so I yell another thanks. He asks me where I got them from, and I say I don't know. And now I'm speeding up because this dude's definitely following me. I turn down onto the main road where I know there will be people, hoping that this will deter him. Well, nope, there he is, following behind me, still trying to get me to engage. I come to a busy crossing and I know that he's about to catch up to me. And as safely as I could, which was probably not that safe, I just bolted across the road, leaving him waiting on the other side still shouting something at me. I ran across another road and I dived into a convenience store and I called the person who was looking after me at that time. They told me to stay there and that she was coming to get me. While I was on the phone with her, I see the man round the corner looking around. He's even checking between cars and everything. And thankfully, he gave up pretty quickly and seemed to leave. My care worker called the police and 2 officers came, but they weren't overly concerned. I guess he hadn't technically done anything. But what was interesting was that they did seem to know from the description who it was likely to be, and said that they are in touch with the people who work with him. Anyway, about 4 days later, I go to a coffee place that I used to read in not far from there, and it didn't even cross my mind that I might see him again. In my head, it was all sorted, done, dusted. I take a seat near the toilets and I start reading when the toilet door opens and the big blue coat that I described to the police a few days earlier emerges. I stare at him in fear and he briefly regards me and then he carries on past. I have no idea if he recognized me or not, and it didn't seem like it. So safe to say, I'm a lot more careful now. Hello everyone, my name is Molly, and I wanted to share my story, so here goes. Every morning at the crack of dawn, I would trudge into the little coffee shop where I work part-time. The early hours were grueling, but the routine had its comforts. The shop, with its warm lights and the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee, felt like a small bustling world of its own. As a university student, balancing my work and my studies was challenging, but I did enjoy the independence. And my co-workers too, they were nice and hilarious. That particular morning seemed no different from any other. I set up the shop, filled the grinder with beans, and I did my best to prepare for the onslaught of regulars who relied on us to kickstart their day. The mingling of voices, orders, and the hiss of the espresso machine became a familiar symphony that I found strangely soothing. I was halfway through my shift when she walked in. An older woman with a striking appearance. Her hair was short and spiked, the sort of style one might call edgy. She wore dark sunglasses and a leopard print jacket that certainly stood out amidst the usual crowd of business suits and the casual commuters. But still, it's none of my business. So I just greeted her with my customary smile, ready to take her order. The woman, with a confident air, approached the counter and without removing her sunglasses, ordered a drink that was nothing short of a barista's challenge. It was a concoction of espresso, rare syrups, non-dairy milk substitutions, all to be crafted with precision. She also requested a bagel toasted just so. As I worked on her order, she struck up a conversation, and her voice was loud enough to draw the attention of the other customers. "So, what's your name?" she asked, a question that I couldn't really sidestep while on the job. "Molly," I answered, maintaining politeness, even as I felt a slight edge in her curiosity. She repeated my name, and despite her chatty demeanor, I sensed an intensity in her that was unsettling. As I handed her the drink and the bagel, she smiled widely, reaching into her handbag, and then she pulled out a slip of paper, scribbled something on it, and then extended it towards me. Her number. She insisted that I take it, expressing a desire to hear from me soon. I kind of hesitated, trying to think of a way to refuse without causing a scene that might disrupt the flow of the morning. But her insistence was so unnerving that I found myself just accepting the paper with the intention of discarding it later. And with a wink, she left the shop. Once she was gone, I discreetly tossed the slip into the recycling bin, hoping that she wouldn't return. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of steaming milk and grinding coffee beans. I tried to shake off the encounter, just focusing instead on the usual rhythm of my day. As the clock ticked towards the end of my shift, I began to relax. The thoughts of my afternoon classes and also catching up with friends filled my mind as I prepared my stuff to leave. I said my goodbyes to my coworkers, and then I headed out the door. Outside, the world felt vibrant and alive, a contrast to the structured environment of the cafe. I took a deep breath of fresh air and I was ready to embrace the rest of my day. Until I saw her. The woman from the morning, leaning casually against a car, sunglasses perched on her head as her sharp eyes locked into mine. I paused, unsure how to react. She pushed off from the car, approaching with an air of casual confidence that was borderline arrogant to me, and she expressed her disappointment that I hadn't called her. Her tone was light, but with an undertone that sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to explain that I wasn't interested. I was hoping that my politeness would diffuse the situation, but she pressed, demanding to know why not. I felt cornered, and honesty seemed the only course for me. I told her that I wasn't interested in women, hoping that she would understand and then leave me alone. But then her demeanor changed. She was angry, she was frustrated. She accused me of being brainwashed, and she ranted about how I didn't know what I was missing. I repeated my refusal, more firmly this time, and I turned to leave. But she wasn't done. Her hand shot out, grabbing my arm, and her grip was firm and unyielding. A jolt of fear coursed through me as I tried to pull away, my mind racing with possible ways to escape the situation. And just then, help arrived in the form of my co-workers, who had just clocked out as well. Seeing the confrontation, they then rushed over and they urged her to leave. They also told her that if she didn't listen, they would be calling the police. Reluctantly, she released her grip. There was a look of irritation clearly on her face. She muttered something inaudible, then she retreated to her car, and then gave me one last glare before she left. As she drove away, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders, though my heart continued to race. My coworker stayed with me until I felt steady enough to head to class. In the days that followed, I just couldn't calm down. I always felt like someone was watching me. I was also paranoid that the woman would just come again and cause a scene. So I kind of altered my routine slightly, taking different paths to class and keeping an eye out for unfamiliar faces. And thankfully, I didn't see that woman again. For context, I live in the UK, and this happened when I was around 9, and this is a true encounter. My friend had come over and we had decided to go to a sweet shop, which was a few minutes walk down my house. We picked a few treats, went to the cashier, and while we were in the queue, I remember her saying that thank God that we were alone to play peacefully at home. And I meant alone, as in the fact that this time, her mom didn't send her younger sister who would annoy us. And now looking back, I think this man heard and thought that we were home alone entirely. Skip to when we were about to pay. This older man looked like he was in his late 40s, offered to pay for us. We politely refused, but upon his insistence, we didn't know any better as little girls, so we accepted. I actually remember being happy that I saved on my pocket money that day. We were leaving the shop, and I saw the man get into a car which had a few other men inside, and then he even waved at us. We were walking home, and I noticed his car behind us, but I didn't give it much thought. Until he slowed down to match our pace and rolled down the window, telling us that he was on a call with my dad, who told him to drop us home. We got a bit scared because I don't know this man, and why would my dad tell him to drop us home when he doesn't even know we left home because he's at work? We said no, to which he said, "I paid for your sweets. Won't you pay me back?" We started walking faster. It was daytime, so he couldn't have forced us in because I remember it being a sunny day, so more people than usual were in the park that was within eyes distance away from us. Forcing us, would mean noise, which would attract attention. Within a few minutes, we got home thankfully, but moments later, we heard the doorbell ring. My mom was at home and she answered the door. This man was startled and stuttered. He said, do you need help with the garden? I'm a garden cleaner." My mom then declined. At first, we didn't tell her about what had happened because we were too scared, but then we did it later, and she did report this to the police. But I don't know what happened next. Now, I think, what if we were home alone? What if we opened the door? And worse, what if we sat in the car? This happened fairly recently. I was trying to get a train to the city for a night of drinking with some friends. Unfortunately, the trains weren't running to the city center that day for some reason, so they had a replacement bus service instead. So I then went to go looking for where they had hidden the replacement buses in the train station, and after a while, it seemed like I was on the right track. But just as I had found a very promising corridor, I heard running footsteps coming from behind me. I glanced around to find an Arabic man sprinting to a stop beside me. I know that he was Arabic because he tried to offer to teach me Arabic while I was trapped with him later on. He asked me if I knew where the replacement bus service was. I replied that I was probably just as lost as he was, and that I was trying to find it myself. I thought that that would be the end of our interaction, but he continued walking beside me. Fair enough, I thought. We're both looking for the same thing, so maybe he thinks that we stand a better chance of finding it together. I wish I had turned around and darted into a bathroom or something. It turned out that the corridor did lead to the replacement bus, and the driver was standing outside the doors. He assured us that we had plenty of time and that we were the first ones here. He opened the doors to let us in, and the bus was completely empty. I decided to take a random seat in the middle and then huddled up next to the window, ready to put my headphones on. And where does this guy choose to sit in the completely empty bus? Well, right next to me, trapping me in the row of seats. I thought that it was a little weird at that time, but I figured no harm would come of it. He asked me why I'm headed to the city center. I tell him that I'm meeting friends for a girls' night out, and then very pointedly put my headphones on and then start finding a good song to listen to. He insists that he should join us, but I tell him that it's girls only and that I don't really know him. He answered that we could get to know each other and that he'll buy me a drink. I tell him no thanks and that I just wanted to see my friends today. The bus has gotten moving at this point, and there were a few others on board. From there, he then proceeds to badger me with questions, all of which I ignore or give one-word answers to. After a bunch of them, my replies became variations of, "I just want to listen to my music now," and "I'm not interested in talking, I'm sorry." He then starts complimenting my body, telling me that he thinks that I'm beautiful and repeating over and over and over again, "I really like you." My only responses now are, "Leave me alone," every so often, and I am visibly shrinking away from him as he's leaning closer. The bus driver doesn't seem to know where he's going for his next stop, and the city center is ages away, so I'm trapped in the seat and starting to really panic. He then starts stepping up to "I love yous," and then he leans right up to me making kissing sounds with his lips. That was the moment that my hero intervened. It was a man around my age, sitting a few seats back. I'll quote what I can remember of the conversation. For my hero, let's call him Hero, and for the guy, let's call him Creep. my hero said. Excuse me, mate. She asked you multiple times to leave her alone. The creep answered, Fuck off. My hero then said, You need to move away from her. You're clearly bothering her. The creep angrily replied, Mind your own business. We're fine. My hero then talks to me and asks, Do you want to move? And me, practically pinned against the window getting pretty scared, I answered yeah. But then the creep gets up and then storms up to the man and asks, Do you want to fight? Do you want to fucking go right now? And then my hero says, Nah, I'd rather you control yourself and leave her alone. The creep is visibly ready to start throwing punches when the driver calls back if there's a problem and if he needs to kick anyone off the bus. The creep quietly says no and then moves to a few seats behind my hero, much to my relief. I mouth several thank yous to my hero, who just smiles like it was no big deal. The creep tried following me off the bus, but my friends met with me, so he then walks off. And I'm so glad that my hero intervened when he did. So long story short, there was this man who looked to be in his 30s staring me down at the train station on my way home from school a couple of weeks ago. Initially, I, a 17-year-old female, had been waiting near the station exit because it was absolutely pissing it down outside and I didn't have an umbrella on hand. I ended up waiting for a while after the raining had stopped because that man, who had waited near for what I presumed to be the same reason, had been staring at me the entire time. I hoped that he would leave before me, but seeing as he didn't, I eventually brushed it off and I left the station. Of course, because I wouldn't be writing this if he hadn't. The man followed me. He practically chased me down and managed to catch up to me at a red light. At this point, I was alarmed because the route that I have to take to reach my house is usually vacant and quite obscured, and just generally not a safe area to go through alone. Immediately, he started talking to me. He was offering to take me to lunch and buy me things. I was polite but very clearly dismissive. And while he talked to me, I quickly decided to run in the opposite direction to reach one of the main streets where there'd likely be more people so that I wouldn't have to be alone with him any longer. He followed me there too and kept insisting on buying me an umbrella even though it had stopped raining. I politely declined and I was walking faster with every moment that passed, but he just seemed to get frustrated and then followed me the whole time up until I reached a store. He didn't stop there, of course. He walked in the store with me, and the cashier seemed oblivious to how uncomfortable I was. I tried to distance myself by going through one of the aisles, which was quite narrow, and the guy took that as an opportunity to grab me by my waist and then run his hands down my lower back, and I just froze. At that point, I felt defeated. I decided to play along, so I told him that I'd write down his number at the exit, and he seemed happy with that. He kept touching me, and I felt disgusted just at the memory of it. I'm not even sure how many times he'd had his hands around me in the span of a few minutes. He'd hugged me, and at some point, grabbed me by my hands and wrist, and I just barely dodged the kiss. Luckily, I seemed convincing enough and he didn't follow me all the way to my house like he was insisting on. I didn't see him again for a week, so I started to let my guard down, but as of a few days ago, I keep finding him sat in front of the train station at the time that I come back from school. I had seen him for 4 days in a row now, and although it's probably a coincidence, and that I shouldn't think much of it, it's a really unpleasant reminder. Every time that I see him, He's sitting on the bench on the street that I have to cross, and he just stares at me. And it is beyond creepy. The story dates back to spring of 2016. At that time, I was in my late 20s. I was young and fit with very long blonde hair, a total hippie chick that had quit her job to travel the US with my ex at that time. This was pre-pandemic, before the van life or tiny home movement really took off. We left our home in the Midwest of January that year after holiday celebrations, saying goodbye to our friends and our family. And by some time in April or early May, we made it to southern Texas and decided that we wanted to check out Padre Island National Seashore. For those of you unfamiliar with Padre Island, it is a seashore that you can drive right onto with your vehicle. My now ex and I were in a 26-foot Class C 1976 Chevy motorhome. We drove into the island at nighttime, and waking up the next morning was the most insane and phenomenal experience. The ocean was a mere 15 feet away. I mean, the visual was so breathtaking that I will never forget it. We arrived on a Thursday or Friday, and the beach was beyond packed. Another thing for people unfamiliar with Padre, it is where many Texans, high schoolers and college kids mainly, flock for their spring break. Spring break was just the week prior to when we got there, or maybe still going on, but either way, it was busy and we had an awesome weekend partying away. During this weekend, we noticed that workers for the park would often drive down the beach. They are very protective of their sea turtle population there and would slowly drive by in marked vehicles a few times a day. By Monday morning, we awoke to find the entire island emptied out. When I tell you, we were literally the only ones, both when you look left or right. We were the only ones for what seemed like miles. But still, it was a gorgeous morning, so I walked the dog quickly, and then I came inside to sit at our pop-up dining table to do some journaling. My ex was asleep on the very back couch, and we were backed in with the windshield facing the ocean, and so of course, I took a seat looking towards the beautiful view. Maybe 15 minutes after I sat down to journal, a gray beat-up pickup truck drove by kinda quickly heading towards the direction of the park entrance. That was the first activity that I had seen on the island that morning, and I thought nothing of it. However, maybe 5 to 10 minutes later, the same truck came driving back past our RV, this time much slower. The man driving the pickup was going so slow in fact that we made eye contact for several seconds as he went back by. He also seemed to drive closer to our vehicle in order to better see inside. Well, alarm bells should have been ringing at this point, but I kind of just shrugged it off. I was very much in my free spirit phase, and I was not easily put off. This is where it really gets creepy. So, obviously, this guy needed to turn back around since he was driving away from the park entrance again. But I was honestly minding my own business. I kind of immediately put him out of my mind. But yes, several minutes later, maybe around 10 minutes, the man came back. But this time, he pulled directly up to our RV with his truck, essentially nose to nose at a 45-degree angle blocking us in. It was at this point that my heart dropped and I began to get scared. I screamed my ex's name immediately, and up he jumped from the couch. I know he could hear the panic in my voice, and I will never forget how quickly he got up and how he had his arms spread across while he ducked down to see through the windshield. He was 6'5" and very bearded, and I'm 1,000% sure that he was the only reason that the man in the gray beat-up truck sped off like a bat out of hell. It took several minutes for my heart rate to return to normal. My ex and I just looked at each other, and that was the most unusual encounter in our trip. Surprisingly, we stayed another week after that in the same spot. The idea never entered my head that the man could bring reinforcement and come back for me or us. I was so very fearless and naive back then. Anyway, it wasn't until later that day that another fact dawned on me. When my ex and I had arrived over the weekend, we only pulled out one camping chair. That one camping chair was in plain sight next to our RV outside. Prior to this spot, we had never done that. We always got both chairs out, but we ended up using driftwood to sit on when we had our bonfires. So, that was the nail in the coffin for me. The scary man in the gray truck absolutely thought that I was a young girl all alone, and I still wonder to this day, almost 10 years later, what all he had in mind for me that morning. I'm a 19-year-old female. At that time, I worked at a resort. We closed at around 10 p.m. and the bus showed up at 10:20 p.m. I'm taking my usual route and I have my headphones on. Usually when I do, I'm paying attention to shadows, sounds, and looking behind me with one ear always out. At that point, I'm walking up to my bus stop that's on the right side of the sidewalk, and right across on the left side, there's this doorway entrance, but it created like a little nook if you know what I mean. I always wait in that nook. This time, I decided to stand by the road right next to the actual bus stop, and maybe a minute later I turned, and there is this man in the doorway nook, and I ignore it, but position myself so I can see him through my side view. A few seconds later, he then walks up and asks me if I'm taking the bus. I didn't think much of it because I've had that happen a lot, so I just reply with a yes. He then says nothing for a few seconds and then says, "Well, I'll be waiting over here." And then giggles and then backs up into the nook. A few minutes go by and then he walked up to the bench which my back is facing. So I reposition myself again, and in the corner of my eyes, I can see him unzip his bag and slip a pocket knife up his sleeve, and then walks back into the nook. At this point, I decide to move in front of the bus stop along the curb so that my back is facing everything but him. He then sees that and then walks past me and then try to go around the actual bus stop and then walk right up behind me. As he is walking behind me, maybe 4 feet away, I turned around and I stare at him. He pauses, smiles, and then backs up and walks around and goes back into the nook. The bus then shows up. I should have caught the next one, but he insists that I go ahead of him. I get in, and then he follows me to the back of the bus. Again, I should have just sat up front, and he then sits in the row right next to me. We would have been shoulder to shoulder if the aisle wasn't there. I was texting my boyfriend the entire time, so he's already at the bus stop waiting for me. This man followed me to my town, gets off with me, walks with me to the end of the sidewalk, and once he saw my boyfriend, he turned right around and was waiting for the next bus. About a year ago, I was asked if I wanted to play some online MMO by one of my friends. At that time, I didn't know how much trouble a game would be able to cause me. Let me start off by saying that I haven't ever really been a gamer. I wasn't even aware that you could have in-game chats with people. I didn't know what to do, but I wanted to give this online gaming thing a try since my friend said that it was so much fun. I joined a large guild, and some veteran players were kind enough to show me the ropes. And thanks to everyone's help, my character grew and I was enjoying my new gaming experience. One of the best players was a guy called Masaru. He seemed to be a pro at this. He was among the highest in our guild and boasted an armory of rare and difficult to obtain weaponry. He seemed to have all the best stuff, and everybody looked up to him. Masaru seemed to care about me the most though. I don't know if that's because I was the only girl on the team. He helped me raise my level and gifted me loads of cool weaponry and armor that he said that he didn't need anymore. Everyone in the guild was surprisingly close to one another. They regularly had Skype calls and even met up in real life. We used to use Skype to speak to one another while we played. We then chatted in the in-game chat and we all exchanged email addresses. Most of the members of the guild lived in Kanto and Kansai, and I lived in Hokkaido, so I never attended any of their offline meetings. It was just too far to go, and there were too many meetings for me to attempt to go to any one of them. The distance between Hokkaido and Kansai is about a 24-hour drive, around 1,500 kilometers or 956 miles. So no. I wasn't really careful enough about what I was doing online though. I realize that now. Without thought, I shared personal information about myself with people that I hadn't even met, including members of my guild. Thankfully, I didn't reveal my address or my phone number, and I am really glad that I didn't do that. Now, let me tell you about Masaru. He was a student living in Kansai, and it seemed like every time that I logged in to play, he was ready and waiting for me. He was always eager to play with me, and I would get messages like these from the moment that I logged in. "Ah, I found Mokori." That's my name, by the way. "What are you doing at the moment? Are you alone?" Maybe not. I guess you could be with someone." One thing that I need to point out is that every time this Masaru guy would send me a message, he would include a certain emoji, and he was known for those emojis, so keep that in mind. He would send these messages to me in a one-on-one chat, excluding other members from the guild. He would send them when we were playing as a group and when we were doing our own solo plays. It was pretty intense. I responded dutifully to begin with, but one day that I was busy hunting with my friend with another group, I didn't have time to reply at that point, so I didn't reply. I just thought to myself, I'll just reply to him later. Then suddenly, he sent that emoji that he uses in the main chat that everyone can see who plays the game. He was supposed to be playing with someone else, but what it looked like he had done was go in search of me to see what I was doing. I know it was only a game, but it felt a little weird that he did that. I should have probably realized that this was an early red flag. Because he then turned up and started talking to me in the game in an open environment that anyone could see, and I felt as if I needed to apologize for not getting back to him in our private chat, and I feel like that was his intention. So I said sorry, and then he replied, "It's okay, Mokori. If you have more fun playing with others than playing with me." And then he posted that emoji that was quickly becoming his calling card. After replying to me, he then logged out, and that was weird because this guy was always logged in. I was shocked by his lack of embarrassment. My friends were shocked too. It was so weird of him to come over and find me and then do this lame sulk quit. And now I realize that that was the point his unusual obsession with me was beginning to be revealed. Every time that I logged in from that day forward, the first message that I would get would be this emoji. The game we played had this friend list built into it, and whenever someone in your friend list appeared online, the list would light up and tell you which part of the map your friend was at. I'm certain that Masaru was sat there waiting for me to log in and monitor my location in the game. I found his actions creepy, and I didn't feel like dealing with him for a while, so I planned on giving the game a break and not logging in for about a week or so. After about a day at best of not logging in, I got an email notification to my phone, and I bet you can guess who those emails were from. They went like this. "Hey, why haven't you logged in for a while?" Followed by that dumb emoji that he sends after every message. He then added, "I feel so lonely without Mokori. I guess maybe you hate me, but I don't understand because I like you so much." Okay, at first it was chat in game, then it evolved, and now it was getting close to harassment. I have a private life and I preferred to keep that from the internet, and I wasn't interested in Masaru becoming a part of my private life either. On top of all of this was the fact that Masaru was a college student and I was a working adult. I didn't really have time to play email ping pong with him, but he seemed to have endless hours of free time. The emails were so constant that it was a nightmare. They would come in the middle of the night, in the morning, when I'm at work or on a break. It was just too much that I decided to act, and I decided to respond. "Hey, when I'm playing games, I want to have fun with everyone who plays. I don't want to give you special attention. I have no intentions of doing that. I don't have any special feelings for you, and I would like you to refrain from sending me these emails at all hours of the night. It's annoying." I wrote something like that, and in a matter of moments, I had a response from Masaru. It was just that emoji that he used all the time, and nothing more. I sighed at the sight of that, and I locked my phone because I was just so done with it. From that day onwards, I stopped speaking to Masaru, and I stopped playing that online game. Well, I think I might have logged in once or twice more, but I just couldn't enjoy it again. After 3 weeks after I quit playing online, I got an email from someone else that I used to play with, someone from my old guild. They said, "I haven't seen you recently. Maybe you got busy? But hey, we all miss you. So if you ever get lonely, log back in again and hang out with us. Masaru seems to be a bit busier these days. He quit university or something. We don't see him log in at all." Masaru quit university? I somehow felt a bit of a bad feeling about that email having said that. I decided that I would log back in when I was free soon. I replied with some words to that effect, and then completely forgot about the whole thing. A little about what I was doing at that time is that I was working as a certified instructor. Basically, I visited educational bodies, and back then, I was in charge of free trials. A means for my company to get work, I guess. At the end of each free trial, participants were asked to fill out a survey. It was a simple questionnaire where you can enter your thoughts on the instructor, which is me, what you made of the class and the content, and of course, some personal information about yourself, such as name, address, and etc. We ask our participants to fill this out online via QR code. One day, I was looking through the questionnaires at the office and compiling the results into a data chart. This was part of my job. I was scrolling through the entries, and then I froze. My hand stopped rolling the wheel of my mouse from what I saw. Under impression of the class was Masaru's emoji. Under impression of the instructor was another of Masaru's emoji. Name, Masaru. Address, Kansai. It felt like all the hairs on my body were standing on end when I saw that. He had found me, and he had attended my class. I couldn't believe it. I still cannot believe it. I racked my brain to try to remember incidences when I might have revealed personal details about myself to Masaru. I think that I may have told him that I worked as an instructor in Hokkaido's largest city, but nothing more than that. The bad thing about saying that was I wasn't sure if I said that my office was in the building in front of the station or not. I feel like I might have said that, but I am not too sure. I was so scared that day that I ended work early that day, and instead of going home, I decided to go and see my parents. They lived a good 200 kilometers or 125 miles away, and I stayed with them that night. It helped that I wasn't supposed to work the following day. It was my scheduled day off. In the coming days, I decided to inform my guild friends about Masaru and let them know that I was leaving the game for good. I was told that Masaru had told the guild that he was looking for a job in Hokkaido recently. I knew I needed to do something about him, so I changed my phone number, my email address, and I quit my job. I left Hokkaido after a few months, and I met a guy that I ended up falling in love with, and we got married. Although some of what went down was my fault for sharing too many personal details about myself online, it was truly frightening to discover that someone that I had met online would go to those lengths to track me down. I had no idea that someone who I had met through a game would be capable of acting like that. I guess for some this may not seem that scary written down, but to me, the person who lived it, it was terrifying. Truly terrifying. I don't think that I will ever be as shocked as I was the moment that I saw that online questionnaire filled in by Masaru. That emoji as well, I can never unsee it. And that is the reason why I will never play online games again. So, I'm new to this city for a concert that I'm going to see. It's my first time traveling alone, so I felt like the safest spot for me is just to relax and read some manga in the city library while I wait for my hotel check-in time to come. Well, I guess I picked a bad spot to read at because people kept trying to talk with me, which is fine, but I'm too shy to just tell them to go away. One person sat at a table across from me and asked me where I'm from and who I came with. Obviously, I lied, even though I assumed this person was an older lady. They were wearing a hat and a thick coat, so I just couldn't really tell. I was nicer to them than I should have been, since I assumed this older lady was the chatty type, you know? She says that I look young and have nice hair and stuff, and asked if I'm from around here and where my parents are. Well, just so you know, I'm an adult. Well, turns out that they're not a lady, as I got a closer look at them as he came closer, and he then comes to sit next to me. He then asked me for my number, and stupidly, I did give him my actual number. He wrote his number down and his name, and asked me to write my name too, and I put a fake name on it. And then, he gives me his phone to put in the info and then compares the written to the one that I put on his phone. Again, I gave him my real number but a fake name. I can't bring myself to refuse since none of the librarians were looking our way and he was very big, so I didn't want to make him mad or something. And then he turns to leave and asks when he can call me, and I'm just like, "Oh, just whenever." Obviously, I blocked him when he tried to call later, so I just hope that he assumes that my number was fake too. But as he left, he asked if I had Facebook. I said no, but then he asked if he could take a photo of me. He's like, Can I take some pictures of you if you don't have a Facebook? And I nervously laughed and said, Um, no. Anyway, I don't think that I'll visit a big city library again. I'll just go to Barnes and Nobles next time or something. Hi, I don't want to use my real name, so let's just say that I'm Hannah and female. In my line of work, securing deals with large clients was both the challenge and the reward. I'd worked hard to establish myself in the business world, proving my worth time and time again. This time, the stakes were high, as I was assigned to close a significant partnership with a renowned company. The anticipation built up as I prepared my presentation. I was ensuring that every angle was covered and every question anticipated. When the time for the deal came, I walked into the meeting with confidence. I was ready to meet the representative from the other company. He was a man known for his firm negotiations and sharp business acumen. But as the meeting commenced, it became clear that his interest was not in the details of the deal, but rather in me. Instead of engaging in the business proposal, he diverted the conversation to my career, questioning how a woman like me had risen to such a position. His comment carried a weight that pressed down on me. I felt the sting of his words, as they implied that my presence here was unexpected, perhaps undeserved. So I asked for clarification. My tone was steady, yet demanding respect. He then backtracked, trying to paint his remarks as a compliment about my youth and my achievements. But I wasn't about to let it slide. I pressed on, and I was challenging the notion that my gender and age should be a surprise in this setting. His response was jarring, though. He suggested that a woman's primary role was to have children, as if my career was somehow secondary, like an afterthought. The mix of anger and disbelief surged within me, and I saw no reason to continue the charade of a meeting. With my decision firm, I gathered my things and I just left, leaving behind not just the potential deal, but also his outdated mindset. Back at the office, I relayed the experience to my superiors, and predictably, they were less concerned with the nature of his comments and more focused on the lost opportunity. Their criticism came swiftly. They were scolding me for letting my personal feelings sabotage a valuable partnership. The situation weighed heavily on me for the rest of the day. Later on, as I was wrapping up my work, my office phone rang. On the other end was the man from the meeting. He apologized and he acknowledged his unprofessional behavior earlier at our meeting. He expressed a desire to continue discussions about the deal, and he then invited me to a follow-up meeting that night. Despite my lingering resentment for him, the possibility of salvaging the situation led me to agree. So I arrived at the office after hours. The quietness of the place felt different, almost unsettling. The building seemed deserted except for him. He greeted me with a warmer demeanor, seemingly intent on making amends. As we began to talk, his focus appeared more sincere. Yet, something about his demeanor was off. I couldn't quite point out why. But I then noticed that he started edging closer, his body language shifting from professional to intrusive to downright creepy. He placed a hand on my shoulder, and it was a very unwelcome gesture that I promptly removed. I reminded him of the boundaries that we were to maintain, and he seemed taken aback by my reaction, but I held my ground. And soon after, he made another attempt, resting his hand on my thigh. I pushed him away. I rose from my seat with the intent to leave, but before I could make my escape, he seized me with sudden aggression and he was pinning me to the ground. Panic surged as I screamed, and his voice hissing at me to be quiet. In the midst of my struggle, the sound of another voice cut through the chaos. It was the janitor, an unexpected savior of mine. He demanded that the man let me go, and his intervention was enough to break the hold, allowing me to scramble to my feet and take refuge behind him. The businessman, the creep, was furious. He attempted to threaten the janitor, claiming that he had the power to cost him his job. But the janitor remained steadfast, refusing to be intimidated by this pervert. The janitor looked strong, a bit old. He could be around my dad's age. That's probably why he saved me without any second thoughts. He probably sees his daughter in me. He then escorted me quickly out of the building, ensuring that I reached my car safely. The aftermath of the incident was a whirlwind of emotions and formalities. I pressed charges, of course. I was determined to seek justice for the horrible experience that I've had. The creep was suspended pending investigation, but doubt lingered in my mind. Would he really face the consequences of his actions? Or would the system fail to hold him accountable? I don't know. I can only hope for the best. As I returned to work, I carried the scars of the experience with me. This incident, though harrowing, had not broken my spirit. Instead, it strengthened my resolve to succeed more, not just for myself, but for all women who face similar battles in their lives. I'll come back if there are any updates to let you guys know, but that's it for now. So everyone, please, stay safe. A few minutes ago, I was just surfing in Omegle. I added chatting as the keyword for the common interest thing. A guy then appeared. He was skinny in a healthy way, with blonde hair up to his neck. He had a sharp jawline too. I started by asking how his day. He said it's nice, and then he asked for a favor. He talked very fast. He said that his online Skype friend isn't picking up his calls, that he has been calling her for the past 6 days. So, he asked me to call her, and then he started to say her name, or ID, I don't know. I've never used Skype before. And then he spelled it. The name starts with Sunny. I didn't give attention to the name thing fully because all the while I was asking him to stop. He said that she's a popular girl and that they were good friends. I said to him that maybe she's avoiding him and just to let her go. And then he started to act very strangely. He started to cry a bit, but like the tears didn't come out, but his face turned a bit sorrowful. He said that someone might have stolen her Skype account and asked me to call and confirm that that was the case, where, meanwhile, he will stay in Omegle. I again said that she's avoiding and things like that. He added a pint of rage to his sorrow face and then yelled, "No, she can't avoid me. She will not. I donated $1,000. She dare not. I'm going to call again, and I'm sure it's an identity theft." He said these words in a threatening way and squeezed his mic a little bit. At this point, I got terrified and I placed my fingers near the escape button, and I was ready to disconnect. Before doing it, I said to him that he's crazy and that he's a psychopath. He then made a creepy grin and said, "That's called bait." And then he disconnected the call. This ain't RBI to ask things, but why did he say the last thing? Omegle can't be hacked. Only the location can be pulled out. But that's also useless in this case. And I don't know why he said bait. This is my first post on this subreddit, but I recently can't get the story out of my head, and I need to put it down so that I can move on and forget. I met Leo, 18 male at that time, during my junior year of high school. I'm a female and I was 17 at that time. Leo was an immigrant from Guatemala and he was new to my school. We had many classes together, but we both enjoyed choir a lot. One day, when we were coming back from a choir trip, I mustered up the courage to sit with him on the bus and begin a conversation. He charmed me immediately. We talked for 3 hours and enjoyed the time so much. He then gave me a cute origami boat with his number and Snapchat on it, and I had fallen hard. We spent the next 10 days messaging and snapping every single day. We sat next to each other in every class, and we also started eating lunch in the library together. I began to notice a few red flags that I chose to ignore because I thought that I was being crazy. The first was that any time that I invited him to an activity or hangout outside of school, he would blatantly refuse. There was never any excuse or reason, and the answer was simply no. I invited him to several things, even some with my family, and he would never consider it. The next red flag started when he would ask me questions, but never allow me to answer them. He would ask a question, and right as I begin to respond, he would interrupt it with a much more personal question. For example, "What are you doing today?" "Oh, I'm going to... How many boyfriends have you had?" It was really strange. On day 10, I was walking my dog and I got a strange message from him. It said, "I had a dream and I want to tell you about it." At first, I was thrilled and I was curious. But then when he started sending a bunch of messages through, I got really sick. The dreams he had were a bunch of very descriptive, sexual fantasies about me. All of them were sickening and objectified my body in ways that no one would be comfortable. He started telling me the types of nude photos that he wanted to take of me and the things that he wanted me to be doing to myself in them. It wasn't sexy, it was scary. And then he told me how he wanted to meet up in secret several times a week that nobody would know. And that's when I responded, "No, please, never talk to me again." And I blocked him on everything. I called my friend who had him on Snapchat as well, and she frantically told me that he was adding photos to his story. All of them were pornographic photos of girls that look a lot like me. They had the same body shape, the hair color, the skin tone. He did this for 2 months until he graduated and announced to the class that he would be moving to California. Throughout those 2 months, he would constantly try to talk to me at school, the way he first did when we were harmlessly flirting. But I shut it down and I told him to go away. And I thought that I was in the clear, but that was not the case. All summer, I would get messages from random numbers saying, "You look pretty in that pink shirt." "What did you order?" "I ordered a burger." "It's a nice day for the fair, right?" Anytime that I went out with friends, he was there. I would never see him, but he would message me something so that I would know that he was there. All of the numbers were burner phones. At the same time, he was posting photos on his Instagram of being in California, about his new life there and how he was getting a new job, a house, and many more. None of the pictures had his face in them though. I deleted all of my socials and I changed my number. And eventually after I graduated, my family moved to a new town and I followed. He clearly no longer knew where I was, but I would still get messages, some emails, fake profiles of him, just trying to stalk my friends and family. It continued for 3 more years until one day he just stopped. I've never heard from him again. Eventually, I got my socials back, but I made everything private. I'm now married and killing it at my job, but I will never forget this awful experience. Every few years, it resurfaces and plays through my mind on repeat for months. So Leo, let's not meet. This happened like 6 to 7 years ago now, so feel free to ask any questions. Your questions might help me jog my memory and I'll remember more details. I played soccer for 1 year in community college after high school. I knew this guy because he worked for the athletics department. He was also another student. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I had a 1 hour gap between classes. This guy noticed me in the library, asked what I was doing there, and I told him that I had an hour-long gap, and then he started coming regularly to hang out. I didn't mind because he really seemed like a normal guy. He wasn't waiting for anything, but he just wanted to hang out. He brought me little gifts a few times like chocolate and stuff, and he was being a little too sweet for someone that I barely know. I didn't think about red flags back then. With the gifts, I remember that he always downplayed it. He'd be like, "Oh, they had extra Kit Kat bars today in the office. Do you want some?" He never said that he purposely bought Kit Kat for me. I know a lot more about boys now than I knew back then, and I think that he knew that buying me gifts would be too much, but he still wanted to do it without doing it. The soccer season for us ended before Thanksgiving, and the only teams that kept playing after that were going to the playoffs, not us. So after Thanksgiving, we had finals. In that brief period after the soccer season and before Thanksgiving, he asked me about my classes for second semester. To be honest, I hadn't been super organized with course registration, and I honestly didn't know. Also, the counselors were completely clueless. I didn't tell him that, but I remember saying that I didn't want to have another gap hour like this because it wasted so much time. And I don't think that I was happy to hear that. He also asked if I would play another season, and I said no to that. I needed to manage my time better, and playing soccer every day was not helping me. I think my mistake was that I just said too much and unfiltered. I used to do that a lot back then, saying too much without thinking about how it can affect other people's feelings. That was on the last Thursday before Thanksgiving, so no more hour gaps to hang out anymore. We had Thanksgiving break, we took finals, and then we had winter break and everything was great. Winter break was when the real problem started. In the mornings, this guy literally showed up outside my house while sitting in his car. The first time, I didn't believe that it was actually him. The second time, I checked and it was. And by then, it was really clear that we both knew what was going on. He was stalking me. And that wasn't all. I posted on my Instagram stories sometimes about places that I was in. This guy literally showed up there several times, like girly stores at the mall where he had zero business being. He did lots of things like that. He also started pointing his phone at me like he was taking pictures, and that was even weirder. I basically stopped using social media over this. After winter break, this continued. When my parents were at work, this guy came during the afternoon too. I called the cops a few times. They went and tried to talk to him, but he basically told them that he wasn't going to talk and that was it. I think the cops wanted to help, but they could never do anything about it because he was careful not to break the law. Like, he didn't trespass, he didn't make any threats, and he didn't show any weapons. I have no idea what he's doing now, and my guess is that he gave up. Maybe his little obsession kind of became old, and he found other things to pay more attention to. At least, I hope so. But if he still comes by, I have no idea. I think the most challenging thing is that I couldn't tell my parents, since I knew that they would completely freak out. I came here to tell you my story because there are people that go through these types of relationships who are maybe still healing, but I also need some advice. I'm a 17-year-old girl, and when I was 14, I liked older guys. And not guys who were 1 year older than me, I mean 3 to 4 years older. And that's when I met my ex. He was 17 at that time, and he was a really sweet guy, until he started opening up about his mental health and also his drug addiction. And don't get me wrong, I don't judge him for being mentally unstable, but he never took his prescription and he just threw tantrums all day, verbally abused me, and overall didn't care about me. I was with him for 2 years until one day he finally blocked me, basically ending our relationship, and I never heard from him since. Well, until 2 months ago. I came home from school one day and I looked into the mailbox because I saw an envelope. It was unusual for us to receive envelopes unless it was a bill. But it wasn't an envelope for bills. It was one meant for letters. I put it in my purse and I went inside the house. I then went into my room after I said hi to my mom and I opened it up. There was no return address or something like that, but my name on the letter caught my attention. I never received letters from anyone, and I was worried to see a signature that I recognized on it. I started reading the letter. Well, hardly, because the writing was awful. But the person who sent it was telling me how they regret letting me go and that they wanted me back. I thought that one of my friends was playing a stupid prank on me, so I just brushed it off and I put it in my drawer. I was actually laughing about the situation. And later at night, when I was about to go to sleep, there was an unknown number that showed up on my screen. I looked at the screen, confused, because I barely received such weird calls from unknown numbers. I didn't really want to pick up, but I thought that maybe it was one of my friends who was trying to pull one of their prank calls on me, as usual. I picked up and I heard breathing. "Hello?" I said, but there was no answer. So I added, "Beatrice? Are you this bored that you want to pull pranks on me?" And still no answer, just heavy breathing from the other end. But all of a sudden, I heard his voice. "Who's Beatrice?" My eyes were wide open and I hung up. I stared at the ceiling in disbelief and I put my phone on silence mode and I just went to sleep. I didn't think for 1 second that this phone call was about to be the beginning of my biggest nightmare. I woke up the next morning with several calls from that unknown number and I got a little scared. I opened my phone and I saw messages from the same person telling me to pick up and to just talk to them. I tried to ignore it, but the calls and the messages continued even after I got to school. When I was outside the school gates and smoking a cigarette with my friend, I got a call again. I answered and I gave an upset answer. I said, "Dude, who the hell are you? Why are you calling me?" The person sat in silence for a few seconds, and then they said my friend's name. They heard their name, and asked me who the hell was I on the phone with. And then he said, "You are with..." They then say my friend's name. "Aren't you?" Of course you are. I can see you." I looked around and I didn't see anyone other than my other schoolmates. There were only 6 people around us and nobody was on a call or something. I got creeped out and I hung up. I recognized that voice. It was my ex's. I told my friend that he kept calling me and texting me from an unknown number since last night and that I didn't know what to do. She said that I can't really do anything about it and that I should just ignore the calls. But as time went on, I started to get more letters, sometimes even flowers right next to the fence of my home. For context, my ex was from another city and I never told him where I lived. He knew what school I went to, but never which class I was in. But then, I started to get single roses once a week on my desk when I got to school. My classmates told me that they never saw the person who brought me the roses, but they were always there by the time that they got to class. I was super paranoid. I then started to receive pictures of me and my friends outside the school gate. Sometimes, even when I was alone. I was shitting my pants whenever I saw the unknown number pop up on the screen with a picture attached to the message. I finally had enough one day and I called this number that was saved in my phone. I called him, but he never picked up. I started texting him on the apps that I didn't get blocked on, and I told him to stop or I will contact his boss and I will complain about his behavior and even make fake complaints about his service at work so that he would get fired. He really needed the job, so he kinda left me alone for like a week. But then, I started to see him on the street, in public transport, and also outside my school. Mind you, this dude lived in another country by the time that we broke up, and only came back when he started texting me again. I asked some of his friends about the time that he got back, and they told me that he came back into our home country the day that I started getting the calls. I could barely leave the house after I found out that he knew my school schedule, and I always asked one of my classmates who lived nearby to pick me up with their car on our way to school. But one day, I wasn't so lucky, and my classmate who used to drive me to school was sick and couldn't show up, so unfortunately, I had to take the bus that day. When I got on my bus, I saw his blonde wavy hair and I froze. I literally wanted to cry and I didn't know how to get out of the bus without him getting off at the same stop with me. In my country, we aren't supposed to talk to the driver while he's driving, but I had no other choice than to ask him not to let him out of the bus. I explained the situation, and he was, thankfully, very understanding, and he didn't let him off the bus. He was banging on the glass doors and he was screaming to be let off at the stop, but the driver just kept the door shut and then drove off. I then sighed in relief and I started crying while I was waiting for another bus to come. It's been a month since school ended, and I haven't seen him after that. But I am scared that he might come back when school starts. The police won't do anything about it, and I even started getting threatening letters 2 weeks ago. I carry a pocket knife with me when I go out, and I even changed my phone number. But I don't know what else I can do. To note, he has a twin brother. I knew this, but I never thought that maybe his brother is also involved in this. I'm starting to think that they're on this together, and this is why that I see him so often. Update. Hello guys. After I posted this, nothing really happened except one thing. I was going to the airport in the capital, and I bumped into him in the bus on my way there. This really freaked me out because I don't live in the capital and he doesn't either. I was really frightened and maybe out of, I don't know, fear or anger, I just hit him in the face and I just threw fists and yelled at him. I got off the bus as fast as I could and I ran to the closest taxi station. And that's how I got at the airport. He started sending me pictures of myself again and I had a total meltdown in the middle of the airport. I finally blocked his number after I got through security because I just couldn't care less about evidence at this point. I'm in another country now, and he has left me alone. Well, at least for now. I'm going back to school in 2 weeks, and I swear to God that if I get another message or letter from him, I'll be the one getting arrested. I'm really tired of this, and I can't help but think about the horrible things that I would do to him. I hope I don't sound too crazy, but seriously, I'm desperate to be left alone. Me and a friend that I will call Robert had just spent the day in a city a few hours from our own. We had just spent the day at an event in which we both participated in, and we had an absolute blast. After the event, we decided to go out and then get dinner with a group of our friends and ended up staying in the city until almost midnight before we decided that we should probably get going. The drive home was very uneventful for most of the way home. The roads in between the two cities are very rural with only a few small towns between the two. And since it was dark, we spent most of the drive looking for animals that may run out in the road while chatting with each other. As we got fairly close to Robert's house, we saw a car parked on the opposite side of the road facing the wrong way and a man walking around on and next to the road. The car in front of us just so happened to be an ambulance, which stopped to try to help the man. And as we drove past, I made eye contact with him, and then we continued on our way thinking nothing of what just happened. We drove for another 20 to 30 minutes before turning onto the access road to get to Robert's house. As we got farther up the road, we noticed another car had turned on the road farther behind us. Robert lives in a gated community, so we had to turn onto the driveway so we could go through the gate. This is when we noticed that the car that had turned before had turned again and was right behind us. As we pulled up to the gate, Robert opened it and then we drove through. The car behind us had also managed to make it in time before the gate closed. To be honest, neither of us had really thought that we were being followed until this point, but even then we just joked about it. We then drove for a while inside of this neighborhood, which is fairly large, and we noticed that this car was still behind us. The route we took was a large curve, so we figured that he should have turned off by now. But as we got close to his house, we decided to keep going as the road would loop around, and we confirmed that we were being followed. Robert then started driving much quicker through the neighborhood, and the car behind us also sped up. We were going about 50 to 60 on these fairly small roads, but the other car kept up. We drove for a while before we decided to head to the front gate, which had a 24-hour security guard, and we still were not sure if the person following us had a key fob to open the gate or not. We left the neighborhood and then pulled the U-turn back to the front gate. We were still driving very fast at this point, and to anyone, it should have been apparent that we were being chased. As we came back to the front gate, my friend was able to open it in a way that we couldn't be followed. But as we turned the corner, we saw the gate opening and the car that was following us drove in. This is where we made a huge mistake. We turned down a road without realizing that it was a cul-de-sac. As soon as we noticed our mistake, Robert was able to flip the car around so that we could get out of there. But as we drove by the car, I made eye contact with the driver, but I could barely see his face. When we turned out of the cul-de-sac, we turned off the lights and then booked it. We finally had managed to shake him and then get to Robert's house. We waited at Robert's house for the police to arrive, and shortly after the officer had arrived, he got a call on the radio and then he booked it to his car. A few minutes later, 2 more police cars showed up, and we were informed that they had found the car. The man was the same guy that we had passed on the side of the road around an hour earlier. When the police first made contact with him, he refused to speak and did not look like he was in the right state of mind. As the traffic stop proceeded, he began threatening the officers. We later found out that he was mentally ill and an unstable veteran from a couple of states over and had no reason to be anywhere close to where we were. The man had broken the back gate when he followed us in. And the worst of all is that the guy at the front gate, whose only job was not to let people in if they didn't have a fob without stopping at his booth, let this guy in after we had just sped past him. Well, he was quickly fired by the security company. Looking back on this, there is only one thing that I would have changed. I would have called the police sooner, but the adrenaline in the moment clouded our judgment. This is my story about being stalked. Dealing with this has been difficult, and throughout the ordeal, I felt out of control. So I am sharing this to gain control over my story. This story is long as it spanned over 2 years, so I've split it into parts to make it easier to read through. Part 1. Several years ago, I moved abroad to begin a 2-year study course. When I arrived at my apartment, I met 3 of my roommates. Sam was funny and sarcastic, while Bella and Poppy were both nice, some sorority-type girls. We decided to go out for dinner, and I offered to invite our 4th roommate in room 1C, next to mine. Sam warned me not to invite her, saying that she was odd. I was worried because I didn't want to live with a bunch of catty girls. I mean, how were they fighting in less than a day, right? I smiled, and I told Sam that she just made a bad first impression and that I would invite her to get to know her better. Sam grumbled as I left the kitchen, approaching the door next to mine. I knocked on the door and it opened. A short, petite girl with long brown hair and a childlike face stuck her head out. I introduced myself and I invited her to dinner. The girl's face lifted at my invitation as she nodded in agreement. Our excitement about the new school year kept us lively as we arrived at the restaurant. I decided to befriend the girl in room 1C since we were sharing a bathroom. I learned that her name was Nellie, that we were the same age, from the same state, and in the same program. I ordered a Jack and Coke as Nellie leaned into me and asked if I actually drank alcohol. I nodded, thinking her question was odd. We were both in our 20s. Of course, I drink alcohol. Nellie focused her attention on me while we ate, and as I got to know Nellie, I kind of felt bad for her. She was born in Sri Lanka, but immigrated as a kid, and since she had an accent and lisp, I assumed that she was bullied. Nellie was different from me. She was shy and claimed to not have any hobbies nor friends, but I figured that since we were in the same program, I could befriend her. I asked her if she wanted to sit with me in class, and she happily agreed. I felt content knowing that I was befriending her like I was doing a good deed. Part 2. My first 2 weeks abroad went smoothly. I got used to my surroundings, I've made friends, and I got along with my roommates. Sam, Bella, Poppy, and I would often cook and eat dinner together while chatting about our days. Nellie and I got along, but she was socially awkward, so I made it my goal to befriend her, which was easy because we sat together in lecture every day. We even opened our bedroom doors in unison, and I would open my door, then Nellie would open hers and ask me where I was going. One night, I left my room to go grocery shopping when Nellie's door opened and she asked to join me. I agreed, and then she hurriedly put on her sandals and her neon pink coat. I walked through the aisle, and Nellie silently followed closely behind me, and eventually, I found everything that I needed. But Nellie said that she wasn't buying anything, and after I paid for everything, we began to exit the store, and the alarms went off. I stopped to show the security guard my receipt, and he looked in my bags confirming that I had not stolen anything. I didn't think much of this incident, but when I stood at the front of the store with Nellie for the fourth time as my bags were searched by security, a thought crept into my mind. The alarms never rang when I was alone, or even with friends. They only rang when I was with Nellie. I shook my head. Nellie couldn't be stealing. I was with her the whole time. She was a perfectly nice, normal girl, and I was rude to think anything contrary. Part 3. The harmony in the apartment only lasted 2 weeks. One morning, I shuffled into the bathroom and I saw that the toilet was completely filled with 2 or 3 rolls of dry, unraveled toilet paper spilling onto the floor. However, what concerned me the most was the huge wad of hair that sat directly on top of the toilet paper. I knew then that it was Nellie who had done this. She was the only person who had a bathroom key, and her hair color was a match. I tried to think of any reason that Nellie would do this. Maybe she clogged the toilet, then stuffed it with toilet paper to hide her business. But that didn't explain the hair to me. I couldn't harp on the issue though, so I made a maintenance request to have someone unclog the toilet, and when I came home from class, the toilet was unclogged. I studied for 2 hours before going back to the bathroom, and I was annoyed when I found out that the toilet clogged again, toilet paper, hair, and all. This obviously wasn't a mistake anymore, and now we were out of toilet paper. I knew that I had to say something, but I didn't want to directly confront Nellie about this awkward topic. So I sent a passive, non-aggressive text. Hey, if something goes wrong with the toilet, can you make a maintenance request right away, please? I sent the message, careful not to make it accusatory. I didn't want there to be any tension with Nellie, especially since she still sat with me in class. Nellie never acknowledged the situation. She still opened her door with mine. She still hung out with me and sat with me in class. And for the next 2 months, I just dealt with the constant toilet paper and torn out hair. I tried sending more texts, but it didn't help. Nellie would clog the toilet, and I'd make a maintenance request. A staff member would clean Nellie's mess, and then she would do it again. Eventually, after 12 clogged toilets, I was so annoyed that I decided to confront Nellie. Nellie, I know you're clogging the toilet and you need to stop. If you do it again, I'm going to report you. I pressed send as I walked to class. I decided that I wouldn't sit with Nellie anymore. I had different friends to sit with who didn't clog my toilet. And as I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte, I felt bad seeing Nellie sit alone across the lecture hall. I promised myself that I'd still be friends with her and that everything would be fine. Part 4. I was happy that the holiday break was soon and that Nellie never addressed me not sitting with her. My message had worked. Nellie stopped clogging the toilet and we were still friends. But I came home one day in early December and my nose scrunched in disgust. There was a sickly sweet rotten yogurt-like smell coming from Nellie's room. I didn't want to confront Nellie so soon after messaging her about the toilet. So for 2 weeks, I avoided the problem. I didn't address the issue until 2 weeks later when all of our food started to rot almost immediately after buying it. Bella, Sam, and Poppy were complaining about how maintenance hadn't found the source of what was causing our food to rot. When I brought up the horrible smell and an accompanying fly infestation, the girls went to go smell the hallway outside of Nellie's room and returned a minute later coughing and gagging. We posited about what may be causing the smell. When Sam brought up seeing Nellie at 2 a.m. skipping through the woods. Sam was heading back from the club and Nellie was skipping around like a possessed doll, according to Sam. And as we spoke, Nellie entered the kitchen and everyone fell quiet. Sam bluntly asked Nellie what the smell in her room was, and Nellie just silently shrugged her shoulders. Annoyed by this, Sam stood up and grabbed Nellie's arm, guiding her into the hallway as the rest of us followed, covering our noses with our sleeves. Nellie claimed to not smell anything, but her eyes were darting rapidly between the three of us. Sam made a sarcastic comment toward Nellie as we returned to the kitchen without Nellie. Sam was a bit harsh and a part of me felt bad for Nellie. At least, Christmas would be relaxing. I spent 2 weeks at a friend's house with her family for Christmas. They were all welcoming, so I didn't miss home too much. My friend knew about Nellie, so she bought me scented candles for Christmas. And when I returned to the apartment, I felt rested and equipped to face the new year. Part 5. My January exams were online and pretty easy, so I was surprised when Nellie texted me asking if I would cheat with her on the final exam. I politely declined, and she asked if I would go to lunch the next day. I had no plans, so I accepted her invitation. I spent a lot of time with her, but she never actually spoke much. So despite everything, I wanted to get to know her better. Once we were at the restaurant, I racked my brain for things that I could talk with Nellie about. I was attempting to break the awkward silence between us, so I asked her what her favorite show was. Nellie told me that she loves to watch Sophia the First. I was confused. Sophia the First is a Disney toddler show that came out when we were teens. Why was she watching a show for toddlers in her 20s? I didn't know how to expand on what she said, so I changed the topic and I asked her what her favorite hobby was. Nellie giggled and said, "Oh, I do this a lot actually. I listen to you through the walls. They're so thin, I barely put my ear against it. I hear you talk to your parents every day." I tried not to look horrified as I sat there confused and a little scared. Then Nellie started laughing. You're like a mother, but I'm an aunt and we're sisters together." I smiled awkwardly and nodded, and I had no clue how to respond. In a desperate attempt to change topics, I asked her about her childhood in Sri Lanka. Nellie slammed her fist on the table, sending my rice flying off the plate. Nellie yelled that she was not from there, and I apologized, even though she definitely told me that she was from Sri Lanka. Then Nellie began to laugh again. She said, "I have plans for us tonight. We'll go to the graveyard and walk around. You'll be scared, but I'll have fun with you." Nellie's eyes were opened incredibly wide and her mouth seemed to open more than usual. She was scaring me, and I didn't want to be rude, so I said that I would invite our other roommates too. At that, Nellie let go of her fork and quickly moved her hand onto mine. She insisted that we had to go alone. I pulled my hand back, attempting to hide my grimace, and I started out a disingenuous, maybe? Nellie leaned back slowly, rolling her head from one side to the other. and mumbled about how fun it will be. The rest of our lunch was silent, and when we got back to the apartment, I said goodbye to her and I went into my room. I didn't call my parents that night. I went to bed early, hoping to quell my anxiety and get some much needed rest. Part 6. The next day, I did laundry, and then I went shopping, and by 2 p.m., I was meal prepping for the week. I jumped when Nellie asked me to go to the movies with her. I hadn't heard her come into the kitchen, but there she stood, her head down and eyes turned up staring at me. I declined her request, but she repeated her question. I politely declined once again, trying to offset her bizarre vibe. Nellie didn't respond and retreated back to her room, then left for the movies. An hour later, I went to the bathroom, and when I opened the door, I gagged immediately. The smell was bad, but the sight was worse. The walls, floors, doors, sink, and toilet were covered in smeared poop and blood. I could see distinct handprints, and I closed the door trying not to puke. I was shocked that Nellie had done this, but my shock turned into anger as I messaged Nellie. "What you did is weird and disgusting. You need to clean it and I'm going to report you." I pressed send, and I no longer cared about being friends with Nellie. I felt gross, so I went to our shower room next to the bathroom. But Nellie ruined that too. There was toilet paper shoved in the shower drain and wads of toilet paper crusted onto the walls. I was livid at this point, but I had to wait until Monday to report her. So I laid down to take a nap. 2 hours later, I was awoken by Nellie slamming the front door. I heard her footsteps until her feet were visible through the crack under my door. I expected her to knock, but she didn't. Instead, Nellie began to continuously chirp like a bird. She briefly paused and began twisting my doorknob in unison with her chirps. I stood there unnerved as Nellie did this for 5 minutes. And then, Nellie began to rapidly knock on my door and call my phone. 7 times she called, hung up, then called again, while still rapidly knocking. Nellie then began to ram her body into my door over and over and over again, and the shock of it made me stumble back onto my bed. Then, as suddenly as it started, Nellie stopped, her feet still visible under my door, and my phone buzzed and I slowly unlocked it, staring down in horror at Nellie's text. "The cockroach screamed, 'Why do this to me? Because you couldn't be positive in a negative situation?' The doctor said. The doctor pulls off the cockroach's legs and it cries. The doctor has no choice. The cockroach must be killed and its family taken away. You are the funny cockroach." I was terrified as Nellie began to knock and chirp. I was scared to call the cops because I was on a visa, and if they didn't believe me, I could be deported for making a false report. I texted Poppy and Bella, who had heard everything, and Nellie stood there for an hour straight, occasionally pushing her fingers through the crack under my door. When Bella's boyfriend arrived, and his presence scared Nellie away. We met up and talked about what had happened before going to bed. And that night, I barely slept. I was too scared. Part 7. I awoke the next day, anxious about the previous night's events. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't that bad. However, as I peeked into the bathroom, its condition suggested otherwise. Charlotte and Regan were skipping class, so I sat alone. I saw Nellie enter the room, bypass her regular seat, weave through the aisles and inspect each row as she passed. And I sank in my chair as she got closer, horrified by the realization that she was searching for me. With the last night's memories fresh in my mind, I froze in fear when Nellie found me and robotically bent down to meet my eyeline as she sat next to me with her mouth twisted up into a sinister smile. I did nothing as she sat next to me. I was too scared to move and worried that any tiny shift may cause her to attack. When the professor dismissed us, I shot up, frantically packing my things, and Nellie asked where I was going, and I lied to her, saying that I was going to the cafe. I didn't want her to know where I was, so I went home for lunch and I stood in the kitchen, and the door opened. "You are not at the cafe." Nellie's eyes darted up to me. She was looking at the knife on the table. I apologized and told Nellie my plans had changed. My heart raced as I asked her if she liked the lecture. Nellie didn't respond. She just stared with her head tilted and mouth agape. I asked again, but she still didn't answer, and I faced her, afraid that she would use the knife on me. She glared so intently that her veins were protruding. She stood there for 10 minutes before leaving. And later on, I walked to the library and froze as I saw Nellie's pink jacket behind me. I turned to see Nellie staring straight at me with vacant eyes. She followed me into the library, up to the 3rd floor, and then sat directly behind me. With her threat still fresh in my mind, I moved to a different spot, but Nellie followed me. I tried again, but she still followed. I was scared to be isolated in a library with her, so I decided to leave. I quickly weaved through the bookshelves, desperately trying to reach the lobby, but Nellie matched my pace, and I was nearing a heart attack when I ran into my guardian angel, Sam. "Nellie's following me," I blurted out. Sam looked at Nellie, who had stopped 5 feet behind me. Sam nonchalantly told Nellie to fuck off, and I was surprised when Nellie did just that. After Sam and I spoke for a bit, my phone buzzed. It was Nellie, inviting me to the graveyard that night. Sam told me that I would be smart to move out, and she was right. I needed to report Nellie and then move out. It wasn't safe for me to live in that apartment anymore, and I needed to get away. Part 8. I went to Reagan's apartment, as she was the closest person I had to family while I was abroad. She gave me refuge while listening to me retell the last 48 miserable hours of my life. She reassured me that I could stay with her as I held back tears. My phone buzzed. Sam texted that she needed help and to go to the apartment ASAP. I was hesitant to go back in there, but I couldn't just abandon Sam, so I grabbed my stuff and I told Reagan that I'd be back soon. I walked to my apartment and stared up at it, feeling a lot like the priest in the Exorcist movie. When I got to my door, I was immediately greeted by my 3 roommates' distraught faces. I followed them into the apartment, and my eyes grew wide as Sam pushed open the kitchen door to reveal a truly demonic sight. Huge amounts of congealed red and orange liquid pooled across the floor, leading beneath our table where a small bird lay dead with its wings outstretched and its head missing. I felt sick. The windows don't open, so it didn't get in there by itself. Nellie had either found this bird and brought it into the kitchen, or she killed and decapitated a living bird and then put it in the kitchen. I didn't like either of those options. I assured my roommates that I would report Nellie that night, and that's exactly what I did. I spoke to the school safety board, and things moved fast. I discovered that Nellie had lied to us about her name and age. Officials in hazmat suits came to clean the kitchen and Nellie's room. The board had me send them photos of myself daily in case Nellie killed me, and they had to identify me. I quickly moved out, and since Nellie avoided the other girls, they decided to stay. I declined to submit Nellie for expulsion because I felt bad for her, and I thought that moving on would stop her obsession with me. I was incredibly misguided. Part 9. I was happy that my new roommates were normal and no Nellie incidents had happened for 2 weeks. I did have a large uptick in random daily Facebook and Instagram follower requests from blank profile users. I knew who was behind this, but I was avoiding any Nellie-related thoughts. I was having night terrors, and the more I thought about her, the worse they got. I blocked another user as I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte in an almost empty lecture hall. Charlotte nudged me as Nellie entered the room, bypassing her usual seat, and I felt myself freeze up as she entered our row and began walking toward me, staring at me with her dead eyes. "Don't fucking sit next to me," I said, shocked by my bravery. Nellie responded by sitting 10 seats down from me, not breaking eye contact, and I considered that a win. After class, I went home and then walked to the store. I forgot to grab a card, so I quickly turned around to fetch one and ran into someone standing directly behind me. It was Nellie. Did she follow me from my apartment? Does she know where I live? My heart stopped as I backed into another aisle and Nellie followed. I walked to another aisle, but Nellie followed me, matching my pace until I went to another aisle and she began to run. I ran away terrified and Nellie only stopped when I got to the security desk. Security offered to call the police, but I declined and I gave them my email to send me the footage of Nellie chasing me. I had to report Nellie, but since I still had class that day, I decided to report her the next day. 2 hours later, as I waited for Reagan to walk with me to class, I caught Nellie staring at me across the street, but she didn't approach me and walked with the crowd towards the campus. And minutes later, Reagan found me and we headed to class together. I walked beside Reagan past the buildings and alleyways until a rock caught in my shoe and I bent down to fix it. Reagan switched to the right side of me to look at a billboard, and when I removed the rock, we began walking again. I turned my head to speak when Nellie jumped out of an alleyway and onto Reagan. Her hands were outstretched and clasped around Reagan's neck. Words cannot explain how terrified I was. Nellie let go immediately, and Reagan grabbed my arm, walking forward. Nellie began walking shoulder to shoulder with me, her head turned sideways at an unnatural angle. The look in her eyes was not human. Reagan told me to run, and we bolted across the street. Nellie paused but walked away, traffic stopping her from crossing. We stopped, and Reagan leaned against the fence as I bent over and covered my mouth from trying not to vomit. And after a while, we continued our walk to class in silence. We made it to the lobby and headed for the staircase, but Nellie stood at the bottom of it. I won't let her walk behind me," I said, with my voice shaking. Reagan nodded and we followed a large crowd after Nellie walked upstairs, only to find her holding the door open for everyone. Nellie stared at me through the crowd until everyone but Reagan and I had passed through. "It's okay, you can go first," Reagan said while smiling at Nellie. I was shocked at how composed she was, and even more shocked that Nellie listened. When we sat down in class, Nellie tried to sit behind me, but someone was saving the seat for his friend, so Nellie left. I didn't pay attention to that lecture. I sat there shocked and terrified while Reagan hunched low in her seat, rubbing her neck. I felt horrible for bringing her into this Nellie crap, and I knew then that Nellie needed to be expelled no matter what. Part 10. The next day, I reported Nellie to the Student Safety Board and they raised the issue to the disciplinary board. I submitted a lengthy report detailing everything Nellie had done. I included Reagan, Bella, Poppy, and Sam as witnesses, and I gave photographic evidence of the threats, the calls, the smeared poop and blood, clogged showers and toilets, and the stalking. And the next week, I met with the disciplinary board to go over their conclusions. They informed me that they had reviewed my report, met with Nellie to give her a copy of my report, discussed my accusations, and had come to a conclusion. They acknowledged that everything I had reported was factual, but they didn't think that Nellie had any malicious intent, so they would grant a no-contact order, but that Nellie wouldn't be expelled. I was completely perplexed by their conclusion, and I asked him what Nellie had said about all of this, but they refused to tell me anything. I was at a loss for words. I couldn't believe that Nellie was given my full report, knew everything that I said, and knew the witnesses' names. The school put us all in danger, yet they wouldn't allow me to know if Nellie had even denied her actions. I was devastated. I felt my mind go numb. I knew at that moment that they didn't care, that they were going to prioritize a predator. So with no other options, I agreed to the no contact order. The worker tried to get me to sign a non-disclosure agreement so that I wouldn't speak about what Nellie did to me or how the school dealt with my case, but I refused to sign it. The next day, I received an email confirmation that Nellie had agreed to a no contact order. But I knew that meant nothing. Nellie wouldn't get help, and she would never stop stalking me. Part 11. My sophomore year was plagued with a relentless pattern of Nellie stalking me from place to place, sitting next to me in class, standing next to me in hallways, and staring at me daily. Her action was so unnerving and obvious that multiple strangers warned me about her. I reported these incidents every time they occurred, and the school always responded by stating that they would remind Nellie of the no contact order. And they never took any further steps to help me. In sophomore year, Nellie found other roommates, and in them, new victims. She was evicted from an off-campus apartment, and her new roommates, who once sat with her, began to sit far away from Nellie, and they looked terrified. They looked like me. Having incidents happen weekly and having to see Nellie daily made it impossible for me to move on. I was always in flight or freeze mode, and I was terrified by what Nellie had done and still might do to me. I became a sunken-in, miserable, and defeated version of myself. I wanted revenge, a natural result of the boiling rage that I felt. Now at a constant simmer after Nellie was coddled by a university that failed to shell out even a minor consequence for the terror that she imposed on me. I wanted Nellie to suffer in the exact same way she made me suffer. I know, if I had just grown up here at any point in those early months, I likely could have saved myself and others from suffering. Nellie was likely stalking me from the moment that I met her. I just hadn't realized it, and it weighs heavily on me to know that I played a large part in my own suffering. No matter what I write, I can't begin to recreate the evil that radiated off Nellie. I have daily night terrors, and I don't go into new situations. I don't speak to new people, and I don't make friends. I'm not nice to strangers because I don't want to invite something like this into my life again. Revenge came on graduation day, when Nellie's name didn't appear in the book of graduates. She had failed second year, but despite everything, I couldn't help but think that I was a bad person for being content with Nellie failing. Maybe I was just happy that I could finally move on. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.